Daniel Cole shattered the man's wrist in under 2 seconds. No warning, no words. Just a single motion, precise, brutal final, the kind that doesn't come from a gym or a self-defense class. The kind that comes from 11 years of doing things in the dark that governments deny ever happened. The gun hit the concrete. 3 other men froze. And Victoria Hayes, CEO of a $2 billion company. A woman who had never been afraid of anything in a boardroom pressed her back against the wall and whispered, "Who are you?" He didn't answer, because the man she thought was just her driver had already moved to the next threat. What city are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if no one's told you to subscribe yet, I'm telling you now because this story is only getting started. She made him wait 47 minutes, not because she forgot about him. Victoria Hayes never forgot anything. She had a memory like a steel trap and a schedule that ran down to the minute, color-coded in 3 different apps that synced across 6 devices. She made him wait 47 minutes because in her mind, making a driver wait wasn't something that required an apology. Drivers waited. That was the arrangement. That was the job. Daniel Cole sat behind the wheel of the black Escalade on the 4th level of the Meridian Tower parking structure engine, off, hands resting loose on his thighs. He wasn't scrolling his phone. He wasn't listening to the radio. He was watching the ramp. He always watched the ramp. Old habit. The kind you don't unlearn. When the elevator doors finally opened at 8:47 in the evening, Victoria walked out like the building owed her something. Black blazer heels that hit the concrete with the kind of authority that said, "I own this floor," a leather portfolio tucked under one arm, and her phone pressed to her ear. 2 assistants scrambled behind her, one trying to brief her on morning emails, and the other holding an umbrella she hadn't asked for. Daniel stepped out of the car and opened the rear door. She didn't look at him. "No, Marcus, I don't care what their legal team says." She slid into the back seat without breaking stride, still on the phone. "Push the signing to Friday, and tell Ethan I want those numbers on my desk by 6 a.m., not 7. 6. The door closed. Daniel walked around to the driver's side, got in, and adjusted the mirror. In the reflection he could see her. Shoulders tight, jaw set. The kind of tired that isn't about sleep, it's about carrying something heavy for too long without ever putting it down. He'd seen that look before. On soldiers who'd been in the field too long. On people who'd forgotten what it felt like to feel safe. He pulled out of the parking structure and said nothing. That was fine with her. Her name was Victoria Ann Hayes, and if you searched her online, which most of Seattle had at one point or another, you'd find a profile picture of a woman who looked like she was born in a boardroom. Sharp cheekbones, gray eyes that didn't quite smile, even when her mouth did, dark hair always pulled back in a way that said, "I don't have time for this to fall in my face." She was 42 years old. She had built Secure Path Technologies from a 12-person startup. Her father left her into a $2.3 billion cybersecurity firm with offices in 4 countries. She had survived a hostile takeover attempt at 36, a data breach scandal at 39, and a very public divorce at 40 that the financial press had covered like a sporting event. She had survived all of it. She was good at surviving. What she was not good at, what she had never been particularly good at, was trusting people. "Mr. Cole." He looked up at the mirror. "Take the highway, not Westlake. There's a fundraiser at the museum tonight, and traffic will be backed up 3 blocks. "I was already planning on the highway," he said. She looked at him for the first time. Not long. Just a quick assessment, the kind she gave every new employee in the first week. Catalog the useful information, discard the rest. 40, maybe 41. Broad shoulders, under a worn gray jacket, not threadbare. Just lived in the kind of jacket a man wears because it fits right, and he doesn't see the point in replacing something that still works. Dark hair going silver at the temples. Hands that looked like they'd been used for more than pushing papers. He wasn't what she'd expected when the agency sent her a replacement driver on 2 days' notice, but he'd been on time every morning for 3 weeks. He kept the car clean. He didn't talk unless she talked first. He opened doors and closed them like he understood the weight of small things. Good enough. She went back to her phone. Daniel's real name was Daniel James Cole, and if you searched him online, you would find almost nothing. A DMV record, a lease agreement, a PTA email from his daughter's school that had accidentally been indexed by a search engine 3 years ago. That was it. Everything else had been scrubbed. Not by him, well, not originally. But he'd kept it that way. It wasn't hard once you knew how. And Daniel knew how to do a great many things that didn't show up on a standard background check. His daughter's name was Lily. She was 8 years old and obsessed with two things, the color orange and the works of a children's author named Beatrix Potter, which she pronounced Beatrix. No matter how many times Daniel gently corrected her until the day she looked him dead in the eye and said, "Daddy, I know, I just like it better my way." After that, he let it go. Lily was the reason he was driving a car for a living instead of doing the other thing, the thing he'd done for 11 years, the thing that didn't have a clean name, the thing that had taken him to 12 countries and left marks on his body, that he now explained to Lily as, "Dad used to have a job where he bumped into a lot of furniture." She didn't believe him. She was 8, not stupid. But she didn't push. She just drew pictures on the refrigerator door with her magnetic letters and reminded him every morning to pack his lunch because she said, "You always forget, and then you come home grumpy, and it's not good for either of us, Dad." He always packed his lunch after that. His wife Claire had died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 7 months from diagnosis to the end, which the doctors said was actually quick, as if speed were a mercy. Daniel didn't think of it that way. He thought of it as 7 months of watching the person you love disappear in front of you one day at a time, and being completely unable to stop it, despite being a man who had stopped a great many things in his life that most people would consider unstoppable. After Claire died, he quit, just like that. He walked into the office of the man he reported to a man whose actual name he still wasn't entirely sure of, and he put his credentials on the desk and said, "I'm done." The man looked at him for a long moment and said, "You know we don't really do done." And Daniel said, "With all respect, sir, I think you'll find that you do, because I have a daughter who needs a father, and I am going to go be one, and I am asking you very politely to let me do that." There was a long pause. Then the man said, "All right, Cole, but you don't exist anymore. You understand what that means?" "Yes, sir." "Good." And that was the end of it. He'd driven for a car service for 2 years now. He liked it in the way that men like Daniel Cole come to like quiet work, not because it was exciting, but because quiet was something he had earned and intended to protect. He picked up Lily from school at 3:15 every afternoon. He made dinner most nights, nothing fancy, real food, the kind his mother used to make in their small house in Spokane when he was a kid. On weekends, if the weather held, they drove out to the coast and walked on the beach, and Lily collected rocks, and he carried them home in his jacket pockets because she couldn't carry them all, and he never once complained about the weight. This was his life. It wasn't the life he'd imagined at 25, but it was the one he had, and he had decided firmly, completely, the way Daniel Cole decided things, that it was enough. Then the agency called and offered him the Secure Path contract. "It's a premium client," the agency coordinator had said. "Long-term good pay, privacy requirements. She goes through drivers pretty fast." "Why?" "She's a little..." A pause. "Intense." "Intense," Daniel repeated. "Demanding. High expectations. She fired the last guy because he took the wrong exit." Daniel had thought about that for a moment. The wrong exit. The one before the right exit. He said they both go to the same place. She said that wasn't the point. Daniel had taken the contract. He'd been driving for 3 weeks now, and he understood what the coordinator meant. Victoria Hayes was not cruel. She wasn't the kind of boss who screamed or threw things or made the people around her feel small for sport. But she operated at a frequency that most people found exhausting, a constant high-pitched hum of expectation and precision that left no room for error or explanation. She didn't say good morning. She didn't ask how his weekend was. She got in the car, she made calls, she reviewed documents, she sent emails, and when she was done, she got out and disappeared into whatever building had claimed her next, and Daniel drove the car back to the garage and waited. He was fine with that. He was not, however, fine with the silver Lexus that had been following them for 6 days. It was a good tale. Professional. Rotating through 3 vehicles, the Lexus, a dark blue Tahoe, and a white panel van with a magnetic sign on the side that said, Pacific Plumbing, changing position, never getting too close, never staying on them longer than 8 or 10 minutes before handing off to the next car. Good enough to fool most people. Not good enough to fool Daniel. He'd first noticed it on a Tuesday, when he'd run a standard counter-surveillance route, out of habit old habits again, and the Lexus had made 2 of his 3 turns. That wasn't coincidence. On Wednesday, the Tahoe picked them up outside the tower and stayed with them for 12 blocks before the van took over near the waterfront. On Thursday, Daniel changed Victoria's route without telling her. "This isn't the way," she said, looking up from her laptop. "Construction on 5th, he said. We'll add 4 minutes. She made a small sound of displeasure and went back to her screen. The Tahoe didn't make the route change. The Lexus was waiting 2 blocks ahead, which meant they had anticipated the detour, which meant they had at least 2 units and possibly more, and they were good enough to predict which raised the threat level considerably. Daniel's jaw didn't move. His hands didn't tighten on the wheel. He breathed evenly the way he'd trained himself to breathe in situations that required him to remain unreadable, and he filed the information away. Someone was watching Victoria Hayes. Someone with resources. Someone who was patient. The patient ones were always the most dangerous. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He was a driver. He drove. He kept the car clean and the schedule tight, and he went home to Lily and helped her with her homework and watched a quarter of a baseball game before falling asleep on the couch, which Lily then covered him with a blanket from the closet because she said he looked cold and a little sad when he slept like that. Not his problem. He repeated that to himself on Friday morning when he arrived at the garage at 6:15 to prep the car and found something under the rear wheel well. He almost missed it. Almost. It was a magnetic GPS tracker, small as a matchbook, pressed flat against the inside of the wheel arch. New battery changed recently within the last 72 hours. Not an off-the-shelf unit. This was modified, the kind of thing that transmitted on an encrypted frequency and cost more than most people's monthly rent. Daniel crouched there for a long time looking at it without touching it. His phone buzzed. Lily sending him a photo of her breakfast. A piece of toast with a face drawn in peanut butter. Caption, "I made art, Dad. You're welcome." He stared at the photo. Then he looked back at the tracker. Then he put the toast photo away, stood up, and made a decision that he knew, with the certainty of a man who had made a great many irreversible decisions in his life, would cost him something. He just didn't know yet what. He left the tracker in place. If he removed it, whoever was watching would know they'd been made. Better to let them think they still had the advantage. He walked to the driver's side, got in, and sat there in the empty garage. He had a missing daughter, a murdered wife, a burned career. He had scars on his left side that pulled when the weather changed, and a knee that ached in cold rain, and a recurring dream about a bridge in a country he wasn't supposed to have been in. I had a little girl who drew faces in peanut butter and called him Dad, in a voice that made him believe most days that he'd made the right choice. He did not want to do this. "You don't get to not do it," he said quietly to the empty car. He started the engine. Victoria came down at 7:02, which was 2 minutes late, which never happened. She looked different. Not dramatically, not the kind of different that most people would catch. But Daniel had spent 11 years reading rooms and people and micro-expressions, and the particular way human bodies telegraph stress before the conscious mind has processed it, and he saw it immediately. Her left hand was tight around the portfolio. Too tight. Her stride was the same, her face was composed, but the hand said something had happened. She got in. He closed the door. He got behind the wheel. "Meridian Tower," she said, which was where they always went. So she was announcing it to fill the silence, which meant she needed noise to cover something she was thinking about. "Yes, ma'am." He pulled out of the garage. She was quiet for 3 full minutes, unusual, because Victoria Hayes was almost never quiet for that long. Then she said, "I received a call this morning." He said nothing. Waited. Anonymous. Whoever it was used a scrambled line. A pause. They told me that someone inside my company is preparing to sell access to our encryption architecture. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. Did you call the FBI? No. Why not? Because whoever is doing this has been inside my company for at least 2 years, based on what the caller described. Her voice was steady, but her hand was still tight on the portfolio. If I call the FBI, word gets out. If word gets out, they disappear and take the access with them. And then I spend the next 5 years in litigation trying to prove what they took while the damage is already done. So what are you going to do? She looked at his reflection in the mirror. It was the second time she'd really looked at him. I'm going to find them myself. Daniel thought about the tracker under the wheel well. He thought about the 3-vehicle surveillance rotation. He thought about the word patient and the particular kind of danger that patience implied. Ms. Hayes, he said. What? Have you considered that the anonymous call might not have been a warning? She frowned. What else would it be? Bait, he said. If whoever is doing this wants you to start investigating internally quietly without law enforcement, then they already know how you'll respond. They know you won't call the FBI. They know you'll dig in alone. And if they know that, then the anonymous call wasn't warning you. It was steering you. Silence. The Lexus was 3 cars back. Daniel had clocked it the moment they pulled onto 4th Avenue. You're a driver, Victoria said finally. Her voice had a new edge to it. Not hostile exactly, more like the edge of someone who has just heard something they don't want to be true. Yes, ma'am. Why would you... She stopped, started again. What you just said, that's not... She trailed off. It's just a thought, he said. I apologize if it's not my place. Another silence. Longer. No, she said quietly. Don't apologize. She didn't mention it again for the rest of the morning. She got out at Meridian Tower, spoke briefly with her assistant on the steps, and disappeared through the glass doors. Daniel parked the car in the structure, took the tracker's frequency on a small receiver he kept in his jacket, and spent the next 4 hours in the driver's lounge reading a book. Lily had recommended a middle-grade novel about a girl who discovers her grandmother was a spy, which Lily had said was honestly very realistic, dad, and educational. While he waited, he clocked the tracker signal 4 times. The car wasn't moving, but someone was pinging it, checking in, making sure the target was where they expected her to be. He thought about that. He thought about the anonymous call Victoria had received. He thought about the person inside her company, someone with enough access and enough patience to have built this quietly over 2 years. He thought about the surveillance rotation and the encrypted tracker and the precision of it all the way. It fit together with the kind of careful professional architecture that he recognized from a different life. This wasn't corporate espionage by amateurs. This was something older and colder than that. At noon, she called him. Bring the car around. We're going to lunch. And drive something different, please. He paused. Different. Take a different route. A longer one if you need to. A beat. I want to see if we're being followed. He looked at the phone for a moment. We are, he said. Silence on the other end. Since when? At least 6 days. 6? Her voice dropped. When she came back, it was quieter and sharper than before. And you didn't tell me. I was still building the picture, he said. I didn't want to alarm you with incomplete information. You were... He could hear her processing that the way people process things that don't fit the category they've assigned them to. A driver. A driver who runs counter-surveillance and waits for complete information before reporting a threat. Who are you? Daniel Cole, he said. I'll have the car out front in 5 minutes. She studied him differently at lunch. They were at a restaurant she'd chosen at random, a corner booth, her back to the wall, because she'd been the one to request the table, and she'd asked for a corner without quite knowing why. Daniel sat across from her, coffee in front of him. Jacket on, and he was doing what he was always doing. Watching the room, the door, the windows in that quiet, unhurried way that she had noticed before and attributed to introversion. She did not think it was introversion anymore. Talk to me, she said. About what? About why a man who notices surveillance rotations and encrypted tracking devices is driving a car for a living. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. Because my daughter needs me home by 3:15. She stared at him. I have an 8-year-old, he said. She does pickup from Roosevelt Elementary. I'm her ride. That's why I took a job with regular hours and low risk. He looked at the door briefly. Or what I thought was low risk. Low risk, she repeated. And now? He looked at her. Direct. The kind of eye contact that doesn't feel aggressive, just honest in a way that's slightly uncomfortable because most people aren't. Now I think you're in danger from someone who's been planning this for a long time, and you're about to walk into a situation you're not equipped to handle alone. No one had ever said that to her. Not like that. Not plainly without softening it or wrapping it in qualifications. I've handled difficult situations before, she said. Not like this one. She felt the edge of irritation. You don't know that. No, he agreed. But I know what professional surveillance looks like. And I know what it means when someone of this caliber is tracking a target this carefully. He paused. It means they're not planning to steal from you. Then what are they planning? He picked up his coffee. They're planning to own you. She didn't fire him that afternoon. She thought about it. The rational part of her brain, the part that had steered her through a decade of corporate warfare, said, You don't know this man. You've had him for 3 weeks. He's told you things that should concern you, and you have no way to verify any of it. But he'd been right about the surveillance. She'd made 3 random route changes on the drive from the restaurant, and the dark Tahoe had missed 2 of them. She'd seen it herself. She wasn't imagining it. And there was something about him, about the steadiness of him, the way he occupied space, without taking up more than he needed. The way he spoke when he spoke, which wasn't often, but always landed exactly where it was meant to. That made the part of her brain that wasn't rational say, This one won't lie to you. She had ignored that part of her brain before. She had paid for it, so she kept him. In the boardroom that afternoon, she looked around the table at the faces she'd worked alongside for years. Ethan Cross, her CFO, calm, polished, silver-haired, a man her father had always called the most reliable person in any room. Marcus Vale, formerly her COO, now a senior strategic advisor, charming, politically astute, the kind of man who remembered everyone's spouse's name and their children's school activities. The department heads, the legal team, people she had trusted, people she now understood. She had trusted the way you trust furniture without thinking about it because it was just there. She looked at them and she thought one of you, maybe more than one. And across town in the parking garage, Daniel Cole sat in the Escalade with the engine off and looked at the tracker signal on his receiver, and he thought about a woman who had been told for 42 years that control was the same thing as safety. And he thought about how those were in fact very different things. And he thought about Lily, who was currently in school, learning about the water cycle, and probably already planning to ask him 3 questions about it at dinner. He put the receiver away. He started the engine. He waited. That evening, at 7:23 p.m., as Daniel pulled the Escalade out of the Meridian Tower structure onto 4th Avenue, a black Lexus pulled out of a side street 40 yards behind them. Victoria was in the back seat, phone in her lap, for once not on it. He's back, Daniel said. She looked in the side mirror. The Lexus. Yes. What do we do? He thought of the tracker under the wheel well. He thought of the anonymous call and the bait and the word patient and everything it implied. Right now, he said. Nothing. Nothing, she repeated. The word tasted wrong in her mouth. They think they're invisible, he said, as long as they think that we have the advantage. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I've been running this company for 8 years. I have a $1 billion security contract with the Department of Defense. I have ex-FBI on my executive team and former military in my security division. She paused. And you're telling me a driver noticed something they didn't? Daniel glanced at the mirror, just for a second. Yes, ma'am, he said. That's what I'm telling you. The Lexus stayed 40 yards back. Daniel drove home in the slow lane, and Victoria Hayes sat in the dark of the back seat and stared at the man in the mirror and thought for the first time that she had no idea who he was. She thought she should be alarmed by that. She was instead unaccountably relieved. 3 days after the parking garage, Victoria Hayes still hadn't told anyone what Daniel had done. Not her security team. Not her executive assistant. Not Ethan Cross, who had stopped by her office twice that week with his usual careful smile and his careful questions, asking if everything was all right, asking if she needed anything, asking in that smooth, practiced way of his that she had always mistaken for genuine concern. She hadn't told anyone because she didn't know how. How do you explain to a team of ex-FBI analysts and former military contractors that your driver, your quiet, unremarkable gray jacket-wearing driver, had spent the last 3 weeks running counter-surveillance on her behalf without being asked, had identified a professional-grade tracking operation that her own security division had completely missed, and had done it all while opening car doors and saying, "Yes, ma'am," and carrying a paperback novel his 8-year-old daughter had recommended? You don't explain that. You sit with it. You turn it over. You ask yourself what it means that the most capable person in your orbit right now is a man you initially assessed as background noise. Victoria was still sitting with it on Tuesday morning when Daniel pulled the Escalade to the curb outside her building at exactly 7 o'clock, engine running door already opening before she reached the sidewalk. She got in. He closed the door. He walked to the driver's side and didn't say a word. "The tracker," she said before he could pull out. "It's still there." "Yes." "You left it there on purpose." "Yes." She looked at the back of his head, the silver at his temples, the way he held the wheel, not tight, not relaxed, somewhere in between, that looked easy, but probably wasn't. Why? Because as long as they think they're invisible, they'll keep moving according to their plan. He checked the mirror. The moment they know they've been made, they improvise. Improvisation is unpredictable. Unpredictable is dangerous. She absorbed that. So we let them think they have us. We let them think they have you, he said. There's a difference. She didn't answer right away. Outside, Seattle moved past in the gray morning light, the city going about its business, completely indifferent to the conversation happening inside the black Escalade moving south on 3rd Avenue. "Ethan asked me yesterday if anything was wrong," she said. Daniel's eyes moved to the mirror for just a half second. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I was tired." "And what did he say?" "He said I should take the weekend, get out of the city." A pause. "He offered his cabin on Hood Canal." Silence. "Ms. Hayes," Daniel said. "I know," she said. "I know." She watched the buildings slide past and thought about Ethan Cross, who had been with her company for 7 years, who had helped her restructure the finances after the hostile takeover attempt, who had sat beside her at her father's funeral and said the right things in the right quiet way. She thought about how trust isn't something you decide to extend. It's something that accumulates deposit by deposit over years until you stop counting it because it seems too obvious to count. She thought about how obvious can be the most dangerous thing of all. "I need you to understand something," she said. "Whatever you think is happening, whatever picture you've been building, I need you to tell me. All of it. Not the edited version, not the version you think I can handle." He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Pull over." "What?" "I'd rather not have this conversation while I'm driving." She reached forward and pressed the partition button, the intercom, that connected to the front, and said, "Pull over on Jackson, the lot next to the hardware store." He pulled over. He turned the engine off. And then Daniel Cole turned around in the driver's seat and faced her for the first time since she'd known him, and she saw something in his expression that she hadn't expected. Not the carefully composed blankness he wore like a second jacket. Something underneath that. Something that looked just briefly like a man who was tired of carrying weight alone. "6 days ago I found a GPS tracker under the rear wheel well," he said. "Military grade, modified for encrypted transmission. The kind of hardware that costs about $8,000 retail and significantly more on the open market." She kept her face still. She'd had years of practice keeping her face still. I've also identified a 3-vehicle surveillance rotation that's been on us since at least last Tuesday. Possibly longer, that's just when I confirmed it. They're professional. They hand off cleanly, they vary their timing, they position themselves correctly. He paused. The thing about professional surveillance is that it's expensive. It requires coordination equipment, real-time communication between units. You don't do that for a smash and grab. You don't do that for standard corporate espionage. Then what do you do it for? Long-game operations, he said. The kind where you're not after a single piece of information. You're after control, comprehensive control. You want to know everything, the schedule, the habits, the vulnerabilities, the personal connections before you make a move, because when you make the move, you want it to be permanent. The word sat between them. Permanent. They're not trying to steal your company, he said. They're trying to take it apart and own what's left. She breathed. Once. Controlled. And the person inside my company, she said. The one from the anonymous call. They're not acting alone. They're the inside piece of a larger operation. Someone who has access to your security architecture, your schedule, your personnel information. He paused. The anonymous call you received, I've been thinking about that. The detail they described, the 2-year timeline, that kind of specific information doesn't come from hacking a database. It comes from someone who was there, someone who watched it happen. She thought about that. A witness. Someone who knows who the insider is. Or someone who was part of it once and got pushed out. He looked at her steadily. Either way, they're not the threat. The threat is the person they were warning you about. Someone in my executive team. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She looked down at her hands in her lap, and for a moment, she let herself feel it, the cold, sickening thing that lives underneath all the strategic thinking when something this personal is happening. Someone she had trusted. Someone who sat in her boardroom, who ate lunch with her, who knew the names of her nieces and her dog, had been quietly dismantling everything she'd built. She looked back up. You said you know what this looks like, what it means. Her voice was even. How do you know? The briefest pause. Because I've been part of operations like this before, he said. On the other side. The morning outside the car continued without them. A delivery truck backed into a loading dock. 2 people walked past on the sidewalk without looking in. A pigeon landed on the hood for 3 seconds and then left offended by nothing. Tell me, she said, and he did. Not everything she understood watching his face, that there was an everything that didn't get told to anyone, maybe ever. But enough. He told her about 11 years of work that didn't have a public-facing name, about operations in places that didn't appear in the official record, about the particular architecture of the kind of intelligence operation she was now the target of, and how he recognized the signature of it, the way a surgeon recognizes an incision pattern, not from a textbook, but from having made cuts like that himself. He did not tell her about Claire. He did not tell her about the last mission, the one that ended with his name on a casualty report that was subsequently classified and then quietly erased. He did not tell her the name the people who used to fear him had called him, or why they'd called him that. But he told her enough. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, My security team. Why haven't they caught any of this? Your security team is looking outward, he said. They're designed to stop threats from outside the company. They're not built to question the people who built them. She understood that immediately. It was the design flaw of every institutional security operation she'd ever audited. The assumption that the perimeter was the problem when the rot was already inside. What do you need? She asked. He looked at her like that wasn't the question he'd expected. To help me, she said. What do you need to do this? I need you to act normally, he said. I need you to behave as if none of this conversation happened. Go into the office, attend the meetings, smile at the right people. He paused. And I need you to trust me enough to let me work without explaining every step. That's a large ask. I know. I don't give that to people easily. I know that too. She looked at him. This man who had chosen to drive a car because his daughter needed a father. This man with a worn jacket and a paperback in his inside pocket. and 11 years of invisible history carved into the stillness behind his eyes. "All right," she said. He nodded, turned around, started the engine. She got out. He closed the door. She walked up the steps without looking back, and Daniel watched her go and thought about the word permanent and about the dark Tahoe that was parked half a block up the street and probably had been there since before they'd arrived. He got back in the Escalade and didn't move. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to the number. He still hadn't deleted from his contacts the number that belonged to a man named Ray Solis, who was the closest thing Daniel had to a friend in the world that used to employ him, and who had been asking Daniel to come back to that world for the better part of 2 years. The text said, "I need background on a man named Ethan Cross, CFO Secure Path Technologies, Seattle. Everything you can find that isn't in the public record, and I need it quiet." He put the phone away. Then he pulled out Lily's book and sat in the car and read 3 pages while he waited, because waiting was something you had to fill with something normal, or the other things crept in. I was on the 4th page when Ray texted back, "That's going to cost you a conversation I've been trying to have for 2 years. Daniel stared at that for a moment. Then he typed, "Fine." He went back to the book. By the time Victoria's 11 o'clock meeting let out, he had 37 pages and a response from Ray that was long enough to make him set the book down entirely. Ethan Cross had 2 identities. He had always had 2 identities. The first one, the CFO, the Harvard MBA, the 14 years of executive finance, was real and verifiable and clean. The second one was the kind of thing that only surfaces when you know where to look and have the clearance to look there. Ethan Cross had spent 3 years in his early 30s working as a financial consultant for a private intelligence firm with offices in Luxembourg and Dubai, and a client list that overlapped in very uncomfortable ways with several international criminal organizations that Daniel recognized by their operational signatures. He had been recruited by Secure Path 7 years ago. He had been sent there. Daniel sat with that for a long moment. 7 years. Victoria had inherited a company with a mole already inside it, planted before she even took the chair by people who had seen what Secure Path's encryption technology could become long before she did. They'd been patient. 7 years of patient. It was elegant in the way that very cold, very professional things are elegant. It was also one of the most sophisticated long-game operations Daniel had seen outside of state-level intelligence work, which told him something important. This wasn't just about corporate profit. This was about the technology itself. Secure Path's encryption architecture had a Department of Defense contract. If you controlled the architecture, you didn't just control a company, you controlled access to systems that ran classified government infrastructure. He looked at his phone for a long moment. Then he called Ray. Ray picked up on the second ring and said without preamble, "You understand what you've walked into." "Tell me who's behind him," Daniel said. "We don't have a confirmed identity on the top of this. What we have is a network designation. These are the same people who ran the Kessler operation in 19." Daniel went very still. "That's not possible." "It's possible," Ray said. "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking we shut that network down." "We did shut it down. We shut down the arm we could see," Ray said. "The rest of it went underground and rebuilt. These people are patient, Daniel. This is what they do. They embed an asset, they wait some more, and when the moment is right, they pull." Daniel stared out the windshield. He was looking at a parking garage wall, and he was seeing something else entirely. A memory of a bridge, a cold night, a mission that had gone wrong in the particular way that missions go wrong when someone inside has already told the other side the plan. "The Kessler operation," he said quietly. "That's why Marcus Vail was brought in." Silence on Ray's end. Then, "How did you get to Vail?" "Because Vail was Kessler's outside man. I didn't know it then. I know it now." Daniel's voice was completely flat. Not angry. Something past anger, the particular calm of a man who has just understood something he was not expecting to understand. Vail was brought into Secure Path as a strategic advisor. He has direct access to Victoria. He's been inside the company for a year. "Daniel, they have a tracker on her car. They have a surveillance team on her. They have Vail inside and Cross inside. And they've been waiting for this acquisition to close, because once it closes, the DoD contract transfers, and they own the keys to something they should never have keys to. He paused. How long have you known about this? The silence that followed was 3 seconds too long. Ray? We've been building the case for 4 months, Ray said. We were going to move on it in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The timeline was, in 6 weeks they're going to have everything they need, Daniel said. The acquisition closes in 19 days. After that, the window is gone. He breathed. You need to tell me everything, right now. You're not active, Daniel. No, he agreed. I'm a driver. Tell me anyway. Another pause, shorter this time. Then Ray talked. Inside Meridian Tower, Victoria Hayes sat in a conference room with her legal team and her CFO and 3 representatives from the company they were acquiring, and she discussed terms and timelines and liability structures, and she smiled and nodded and asked the right questions, and every few minutes her eyes drifted to the window. Ethan Cross sat at the end of the table, silver-haired and smooth, occasionally offering a figure or a clarification with the precision of a man who had mastered the performance of competence. She watched him the way you watch something that looks like what you know it isn't. She kept her face perfectly still. That afternoon at 3:47, she stepped into the elevator alone and pressed the button for the parking level and let herself for just those 12 floors close her eyes. She thought about her father. Henry Hayes, who had built the original company in a 2-room office in Bellevue, with a team of 6 engineers and a conviction that the future would require the kind of security that didn't yet exist. He had been a builder, her father. He had trusted people in the fundamental, irreversible way that builders have to trust people, because you cannot construct something large alone. He had been wrong about some of them. He'd known it at the end. He'd told her in the last months of his life, not with regret exactly, but with the weighted understanding of a man reviewing his ledger, that the hardest thing about building something worth having is that it becomes worth taking. The elevator opened. Daniel was there with the car. She got in. She said nothing until they were on the highway moving north, the city thinning on either side. Then she said, Ethan Cross. Yes, Daniel said. She'd known. On some level below the level where she made decisions and ran numbers and managed the 1,000 daily mechanics of the company she had known. Not consciously, but somewhere in the accumulated record of 7 years of working alongside someone. There are notes your brain takes without telling you, observations that sit in some quiet archive, waiting for the context that makes them legible. How long? She asked. How was placed before you took over? Daniel said. Approximately 7 years. She absorbed that. Before I took over. Her voice was measured. So my father. I don't know how much your father knew, he said carefully. I don't think he knew about Cross specifically. I think what happened is larger than your company. What they're after is the DoD contract. She turned to look out the side window. The late afternoon light was doing something complicated with the clouds over the Sound, silver and gray, and a deep bruised purple at the edges. Beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when you're not quite present enough to be looking for beauty. There's a man named Marcus Vale, Daniel said. She went very still. He's connected to the people behind this. He's not just an advisor, he's their access point. He's the one who brought Cross in originally, years before you knew either of them. A pause. I know you trust him. Trusted, she said. Past tense. Immediate. I trusted him. I'm sorry. It was 2 words, and he said them simply without filling them with anything extra, and somehow that was worse than if he'd said nothing. Because it meant he understood that this wasn't just strategic information. This was about betrayal. About the particular violence of discovering that the people you'd let inside the walls had only been waiting for the right moment to burn them down. Marcus attended my father's funeral, she said. Her voice was entirely steady. He gave a eulogy. He talked about my father's vision. Daniel said nothing. He cried, she said. I remember thinking how rare it was. A man like him crying at a funeral. Still nothing. He must have practiced that. A long silence filled the car. Then Daniel said quietly and without drama, some people are very good at becoming what other people need them to be. It's not a talent, it's a choice. And it's the ugliest kind of choice there is. She looked at his reflection in the mirror. You've met people like that. I've worked alongside them, he said. And I've worked against them. The second is much easier to live with. She looked at him for a moment longer. This man who had lost his wife and kept his daughter close and buried himself in an ordinary life, and had spent the last 3 weeks running a one-man intelligence operation from the front seat of her car. Daniel, she said. He looked at the mirror. What happened to you? She asked. Not accusatory, not prying. The way you ask someone a question when you actually want to know the answer, because you're starting to understand that their past is the only map you have for what comes next. He was quiet for a long time. The highway moved under them. The light changed. The last operation I ran, he said. There was an asset, a source inside a criminal network. We'd spent 8 months building the case. It was solid. Everyone on the team trusted the information. A pause. What we didn't know, what I know, was that the information was being shaped, curated, fed to us through a source that someone inside our own organization had turned. A double, yes. And when we moved on the target, we were walking into exactly the trap they'd designed. He breathed. 3 people on my team died that night. She didn't say she was sorry. She understood somehow that he wasn't telling her for sympathy. He was telling her because it was relevant. They blamed you, she said. I was the lead, he said. So yes. But it wasn't your fault. It was my operation. In the field, the distinction isn't as clean as you'd like. A pause. I knew something was wrong. I felt it the week before we moved. There were details that didn't fit right. I flagged it. I was overruled. And you went anyway. I went anyway, he said. Because that's what you do when you're inside something that large. You push back, and when they push back harder, you comply. And then people die, and you carry it forever. She looked out the window again. The light was almost gone now. Lily doesn't know any of this, she said. Not a question. She knows Dad used to have a dangerous job and now he doesn't, he said. She knows he came home and she's why. A pause that felt different from the others, softer at the edges. She drew a picture once. Her and me stick figures on a beach, and she wrote underneath, my dad is safe now. She taped it to the refrigerator. I've never taken it down. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. She's right, she said quietly. About the dad part. Whatever else is true. He didn't answer, but something in the set of his shoulders changed almost imperceptibly. The way things change in people when they hear something they needed to hear and weren't expecting to. They drove the rest of the way in silence, and it was the first silence they'd shared that felt chosen rather than empty. At 9:15 that night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with Lily's drawings spread across one end and a secure laptop open on the other, running searches through databases that he technically no longer had clearance to access, but that Ray had quietly reactivated in the 4 hours since their phone call. How was building a map of the operation. Not a geographic map, a relational one. The nodes and connections, the timeline, the plan they were working toward, and the 19 days they had left to dismantle it before it became irreversible. Lily padded in at 9:20 in her socks and her pajamas that had moons on them and said, "You're doing the serious face." "I'm working," he said. "You said you don't work at night anymore." "I know." He looked up at her. 8 years old, her mother's eyes a small serious expression that she wore when she was deciding whether to push a point or let it go. "Come here." She came and he pulled her into a one-armed hug and kissed the top of her head, and she smelled like the lavender shampoo Claire had always bought, and he had kept buying because some things you don't change. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "It's going to be," he said. She looked at the laptop screen, which he'd angled slightly away from her. "Is it a bad guy?" she asked. He looked at his daughter for a moment. "Yeah, Bug. There's a bad guy." She nodded seriously, like this was a logical and manageable piece of information. Then she said, "You'll figure it out." "How do you know?" "Because you always figure it out," she said in the tone of someone stating something too obvious to require elaboration. "That's just what you do." She hugged him once quickly and went back to bed. Daniel sat for a while after she left, looking at nothing in particular. Then he went back to the map. He worked until 2 in the morning, and by the time he closed the laptop, he had the shape of it. The full shape, not just Cross and Vale and the surveillance team, but the network behind them. The endpoint they were moving toward, the precise mechanism by which they planned to force Victoria's hand in the 19 days remaining before the acquisition closed. And he understood with the particular cold clarity that had kept him alive through 11 years of work that people denied ever happened, that the anonymous call Victoria had received was not a warning from a witness. It was an invitation. Someone inside the network had made a decision. They were offering Victoria a chance to fight back. But only if she moved correctly, and only if she had someone standing next to her who understood the rules of this particular game. He looked at his hands on the table. The same hands that had stopped a man's wrist from moving in a parking garage 3 days ago, with a motion so practiced it had happened before he'd consciously decided to act. The hands that had packed Lily's lunch that morning, a turkey sandwich and apple, a note in the bag that said, "You are extremely cool." Love Dad because she liked those notes, even though she pretended to find them embarrassing. He was not supposed to be doing this again. He had made a promise. He thought about Claire, who had known exactly who he was, all of it, and had loved him. Not despite it, but including it, had said once near the end that the thing about Daniel was that he always showed up for the right thing, even when showing up cost him. And that wasn't a flaw, it was just who he was, and she had made her peace with it a long time ago. He thought about 3 people who had died on a mission he had flagged as compromised. I thought about 19 days. He thought about Victoria Hayes, who had spent 42 years being the most capable person in any room she entered, and who had just discovered that the room had been built around her like a trap, and who had looked at him in the back of a car and said without flinching, "What do you need?" He closed the laptop. He stood up. He went to the refrigerator and looked at the drawing Lily had taped there 3 years ago that had never moved. 2 stick figures on a beach. "My dad is safe now." "I know, Bug," he said quietly. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed, and in the morning he would go back to driving. But the driver was gone now. He just hadn't told anyone yet. He packed Lily's lunch at 6:15 on Wednesday morning, same as always. Turkey sandwich, apple. The note. This one said, "You are the best thing I ever did. Love, Dad," folded small and tucked under the sandwich bag, where she'd find it at noon, and pretend not to smile. He set it by the door. He put on the gray jacket. He stood in the kitchen for exactly 30 seconds, looking at the refrigerator drawing the 2 stick figures on the beach. Then he picked up his keys and walked out. The plan had a shape now. It had a beginning and a middle and an end, and the end was the only part that scared him, not because it was uncertain, but because the certain parts of plans like this were the ones that cost something. He'd learned that the hard way in 12 countries. Plans that work always take a price on the way out. He drove to the garage at 6:45, an hour earlier than his usual call time. He needed the hour. He had 3 things to do before Victoria came down, and all 3 needed to happen in sequence, without anyone in the building's security network noticing that the driver was doing anything other than prepping the car. The first thing was the tracker. He pulled the Escalade into the far corner of the level, crouched by the rear wheel well, and replaced the existing GPS unit with one Ray had couriered to him the night before. Same housing, same magnetic footprint. But the transmission now ran through a relay that Daniel controlled. Whoever was monitoring Victoria's location would still see what they expected to see. They just wouldn't be the only ones seeing it anymore. The second thing was the Escalade's interior camera system. The car had 3 cameras, a forward dash unit, a rear parking camera, and a cabin-facing security camera that the agency had installed for driver safety. Daniel left the first 2 alone. The third one he routed through a secondary feed that would record but not transmit to the agency's server until he cleared it. Nobody needed to see this car's interior conversations for the next 19 days. The third thing was a phone call to Ray that lasted 4 minutes and covered 2 topics. The revised surveillance map Daniel had built overnight, and a name that Ray had flagged at 2 in the morning in a follow-up message that had made Daniel sit back in his chair and stare at the wall for almost a full minute. The name was Rebecca Marsh. She was a data analyst at SecurePath, Level 3 clearance. 7 years with the company, same as Ethan Cross, because she had been hired the same week by the same internal recommendation which had come from Marcus Vail. She was the third piece. Cross handled the financial architecture. Vail handled the external network and the access points. Marsh handled the data, the encryption keys, the server authentication protocols, the specific technical material that made SecurePath's system valuable to the people paying for this operation. 3 nodes, 3 roles, 1 endpoint, 19 days. She doesn't know I've made her, Daniel told Ray on the phone. She's still operating normally. I need her to keep operating normally. If she runs. She won't run, Daniel said, because she doesn't know the inside has been compromised. From her perspective, the operation is on track. The acquisition closes in 19 days, the access transfers, and they all walk away clean. And from your perspective? From my perspective, Daniel said, we let them believe that, right up until they don't have time to adjust. He hung up. He straightened. He checked his watch, 7:02. Victoria would be down in 3 minutes. She was never more than 4 minutes off her mark. She came down in 2. She looked like she hadn't slept. Not dramatically, she was Victoria Hayes. She would never allow herself to look dramatically anything in a public space. But there were edges around her eyes that hadn't been there a week ago, and the way she got into the car had a fraction less of that declarative authority she usually wore like armor. She knew now. She'd been sitting with it all night. That does something to a person regardless of how strong they are. Morning, she said. Morning, he said. He pulled out of the garage and she was quiet for the first several blocks, which he let be. There's a particular kind of silence that needs to breathe before it becomes a conversation, and he'd learned long ago not to rush it. At the corner of 2nd and Pike, she said, Rebecca Marsh. He kept his face forward. What about her? She transferred 300 gigabytes of compressed files to an external server 8 days ago. A pause. I found it at 2 o'clock this morning going through the access logs myself. It was buried flagged internally as a routine backup, but the destination address doesn't match any of our authorized external systems. Daniel breathed. She had found Marsh herself. Overnight on her own, working from instinct and controlled fury in the small hours of the morning. He should not have been surprised. He was a little. She's the third, he said. I know. Victoria's voice was flat and very steady. She was hired on Vail's recommendation. Yes, I hired her, Victoria said. I signed off on her clearance upgrade 18 months ago. She came to me with a proposal that saved us $4 million in system overhead, and I promoted her and gave her level 3 access. A pause, shorter and sharper than the others. I handed her the keys. You hired someone with excellent credentials and solid performance, Daniel said. You had no reason not to. That's exactly how it works, isn't it? She said. Not a question. The particular flatness of someone understanding a mechanism they wish they didn't have to understand. That's exactly how it works, he agreed. She said nothing for a full block. Then she said, so we have Cross, Vail, and Marsh, 3 of them, and 19 days before the acquisition closes and the DoD contract transfers, and whatever they're planning becomes irreversible. Yes. What's the plan? He checked the mirror. The dark Tahoe was 2 cars back where it had been every morning for almost 2 weeks now. Consistent, patient, right on schedule. The plan, he said, is a trap, but not the kind where we go after them, the kind where we let them come to us. She waited. The anonymous call you received, he said. You were right that it was bait, but I've been wrong about who planted it. He paused. It wasn't Cross or Vail or Marsh. The call came from inside the network above them, the organization that's been running this operation from the outside. Someone at that level made a decision to accelerate the timeline. Why would they accelerate? Because something changed, he said. I don't know what yet, but something shifted in their calculus and they moved the end date forward. The signing isn't in 19 days anymore. He let that sit for 2 seconds. When? She asked. 4 days, he said. Friday night. There's a private function at the tower, your acquisition celebration dinner. The one you've been planning for 3 weeks. Silence. The dinner, she said slowly. Ethan organized the venue. Marcus suggested the guest list. Yes. They planned the event specifically. They created the environment, he said. Private venue, controlled guest list. Your security team running internal protocols, while their attention is on external threats. A moment where you would be surrounded by exactly the people they chose. He paused. It's not a dinner, Ms. Hayes. It's a closing ceremony. They plan to walk out of that building Friday night with everything they came for. She was very quiet. He could hear her breathing slow and deliberate, the way people breathe when they're fighting to stay ahead of what they're feeling. Then we cancel the dinner, she said. No, he said. We hold the dinner. She looked at his reflection. And walk into their trap. And walk into our trap, he said. That they think is theirs. He let the silence that followed work in his favor. Because she was smart enough to see the shape of it without him drawing every line, and he needed her to arrive at the conclusion herself, or she wouldn't own it completely, and she needed to own it completely for what was coming. If we cancel, she said slowly, they know we're onto them. They disappear. They take the access, they cover their tracks, and they rebuild somewhere else. Yes, but if we hold the dinner, we control the environment. We know where they'll be, and when. And what they'll try to do, he said. Which is what? He glanced in the mirror one more time. Force you to sign the access transfer under duress. They have enough leverage. The data Marsh has been building the compromised system architecture that cross-designed to make it look like voluntary cooperation, while leaving you with no real choice. She thought about that. He could see her thinking the precise and merciless processing of a mind that was very good at turning information into strategy. It was the same thing he found impressive about her, and the same thing that made her dangerous in a crisis. She didn't collapse under bad information. She worked with it. I'll need something from you, she said finally. Name it. I need to know you'll be in that building Friday night. He held her gaze in the mirror for a moment. I'll be there. Not as the driver, she said. No, he agreed quietly. Not as the driver. Thursday moved the way. The day before, the last day of anything, moves with a strange suspended quality each hour, slightly too long and slightly too short at the same time. Victoria went through the motions of her day with a precision that Daniel, watching from outside every room she entered, recognized as the kind of performance that costs more than people know. Smiling at Ethan Cross in the 11 o'clock budget review. Laughing at something Marcus Vale said at lunch, the light, genuine-sounding laugh of a woman with nothing on her mind. Approving Rebecca Marsh's system access log for the week with a signature that didn't hesitate. Every one of those moments was a choice. Every one of them required her to look at someone she now knew was working to destroy her and give them absolutely nothing. No coolness, no distance, no flicker of knowledge in her eyes. She did it flawlessly. Daniel watched and adjusted his assessment of her upward, which he hadn't thought had room to go. At 2 in the afternoon, he received a message from Ray. No words, just a file attachment. He opened it in the car while Victoria was in a meeting with the legal team, and what he found made him close the phone and sit for almost 2 full minutes doing nothing. The network running this operation wasn't just organized crime adjacent. The Kessler designation Ray had mentioned on the phone 2 days ago. Daniel had known pieces of that name, fragments from his operational history, without ever having seen the full picture. The file Ray sent gave him the full picture. The network called itself something in internal communication that translated loosely from Russian as the revision. And its primary business was not theft or extortion, but conversion. The systematic identification and compromise of private sector systems with national security implications, followed by quiet acquisition of those systems through legal instruments that appeared completely legitimate. Secure Path's encryption architecture, paired with the DoD contract, was not the biggest target the revision had ever run. It was the most strategically precise. Because the encryption key infrastructure that Secure Path managed wasn't just protecting civilian data. It was a component of a communications authentication system used by 3 intelligence agencies and 2 branches of the military. If the revision owned those keys, they could listen to conversations that were supposed to be impossible to listen to. Daniel sat with that for 2 minutes. Then he called Ray back. "Tell me you're mobilizing," he said. "We have a team staged in Seattle," Ray said. "We've been waiting for a viable intervention window. Friday night is your window. Friday night is also their window, Daniel. If we move and they see us moving, they abort and the inside assets sanitize before we can build a case. If you don't move Friday night—" "I know," Ray said. "Believe me, I know. I've been living inside this operation for 4 months. A pause. "We need them to make their play first. We need the attempt on record. That's the only way this holds in prosecution." "You're using her as bait," Daniel said. His voice was very flat. "We're using the situation," Ray said carefully. "She's not a situation, she's a person. Daniel, she's going to be in that building Friday night, and they are going to move against her, and you want to let them get far enough that you have prosecutable evidence." He kept his voice even, completely even. "How far is far enough, Ray? What's the acceptable line?" Silence. "Nothing happens to her," Ray said. "I need your word." "You have my word. And I need your team in position 2 hours before the dinner, not 30 minutes. 2 hours. That can be arranged. And Ray—" He paused. "Nobody goes in ahead of me." A longer pause this time. He could hear Ray processing the implications of that, the operational meaning of Daniel Cole, who had been retired for 3 years, asking to be the first man inside a building with 4 confirmed hostile assets and an unknown number of backup personnel. "You're not active," Ray said. "I'm aware," Daniel said. "Legally." "I'm a driver," Daniel said. "I'm driving my client to a dinner. What happens inside the building after that is circumstantial." Silence. "All right," Ray said finally. "All right." Daniel hung up. At 3:12, he picked Lily up from school. She got in the back seat with her backpack and her jacket tied around her waist, because she always refused to wear it properly, no matter how many times he asked, and she said, "Dad, can we get pizza tonight?" "Sure, bug. Can I pick the toppings?" "Within reason." "Pineapple," she said immediately. "That's not within reason." "It's a perfectly normal topping," she said in the tone of someone who had rehearsed this argument. "Lots of people. No pineapple." She sighed. "What about half pineapple, half normal?" He looked at her in the mirror. She had her mother's eyes, and her mother's particular expression of patient negotiation. The one that said, "I know I'm not going to win this, but I'm going to make you work for it anyway." "Half and half," he said. She smiled. Victory. She pulled out a book from her backpack and opened it, and he drove them home through the early afternoon traffic, and for the length of that drive, he was just a man taking his daughter home. He held on to that. I was going to need it. Thursday night, while Lily slept, Daniel laid everything out on the kitchen table. Not dilly, physically. Paper and pen the way he'd been taught to map operations before he was old enough to trust a device, not to betray him. The floor plan of Meridian Tower's private event space on the 42nd floor, which he'd obtained through a facilities management company, Ray had quietly contacted. The guest list for Friday's dinner, 63 people of which he'd identified 7 as either confirmed assets or high-probability unknowns. The timeline of the evening which Ethan Cross had circulated to the executive team 2 weeks ago, and which told Daniel exactly when the room would be configured the way the network needed it to be configured. The signing was planned for 9:15. The moment of the evening when the acquisition paperwork would be presented for final signature, amid applause and champagne, and the general warmth of 63 people celebrating a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The moment when the room's attention would be on the spectacle of the transaction. The moment when Victoria Hayes would be surrounded by people who had spent the last 7 years building toward this single minute, and who would in the noise and the celebration find a way to make her understand that she had no choice. Daniel knew how it would happen, not the exact mechanics, because there were variables he couldn't predict, but the general shape. Isolation, pressure, evidence of compromised information delivered privately in a way that allowed no exit. A document that looked like a voluntary transfer of access authority. a deadline of minutes, not days. He sat and looked at the timeline for a long time. Then he started writing notes in the margins. Not the plan itself. The contingencies. The things that could go wrong and what happened next when they did. Because in his experience, the plan was only the first draft, and reality always had edits. He was still writing at midnight when his phone buzzed. Victoria. He picked up. "I can't sleep," she said. "I know. I've been lying here thinking about my father." A pause. "He trusted Marcus. He brought Marcus in himself years before I took over. And I've been thinking, did Marcus come for him too? Was he playing my father the whole time? Or did he only become this somewhere along the way?" Daniel thought about what he knew. About the revision. About the timeline of Marcus Vale's insertion into Henry Hayes's circle, which preceded even the earliest date in the operational file by almost 2 years. About the patience of it. The meticulous, inhuman patience. "He came for the company," Daniel said carefully. "I don't think it was personal with your father. I think your father was just in the building they wanted." A long silence. "That might be worse," she said quietly. "That my father spent years thinking he had a real friend, and Marcus just thought he had a useful asset." "Your father wasn't wrong to trust people," Daniel said. "He was wrong about that specific person. That's different." "Is it?" "Yes," he said. "It is. Because the ability to trust is what builds things. What Marcus did was parasitic. He fed off your father's capacity for trust without generating any of his own. That's not a failing in your father. That's a crime committed against him." Silence. A longer one. He waited. "You've been thinking about this a lot," she said. "I've been thinking about a lot of things," he said. "Tell me one more thing. Not about the operation." A pause. "Just one more thing. Tell me about Claire." He hadn't expected that. He sat very still. "You mentioned her," Victoria said. "Before. You said she knew what you were, and you didn't finish the sentence." He looked at the kitchen table, the floor plan, the timeline, the notes in the margins. "She was the only person I never had to perform for," he said. It came out quieter than he'd intended. "I've spent most of my life being whoever the situation needed me to be. That's not something you decide to do. It's something you get trained into over time until it becomes second nature. And somewhere in that process, you start to lose track of who the non-performance version of you actually is." He paused. "Claire never let me lose track," he said. "She had this way of just looking at you, like she could see exactly which version was showing up, and she was deciding whether to accept it or wait for the real one." A half-beat. "She always waited for the real one." Victoria said nothing. The silence wasn't empty. "She sounds like someone worth missing," she said finally. "Every day," he said. "In the background of everything, but less sharp than it used to be, which she would have said was the right direction." Another pause. "Daniel," Victoria said. "Tomorrow night." "Yes." "Don't let me do something stupid because I'm angry." He almost smiled. "What kind of stupid are we talking about?" "The kind where I see Ethan Cross across the room and I walk up to him and I say every single thing I'm thinking." A pause. "Or Marcus." "That would be counterproductive," he agreed. "I know," she said. "Tell me anyway." "Don't," he said. "Not until 9:15. After 9:15 you can say whatever you want." A short, sharp sound that was almost a laugh. The first real one he'd heard from her. "Okay," she said. 9:15. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow you need to be the best version of the performance." "And you." "I'll be whatever version the situation requires," he said. She said goodnight and hung up, and Daniel sat at the kitchen table for another hour looking at the floor plan of a room where in less than 24 hours, 7 years of patient professional destruction would either complete itself or get taken apart from the inside. He thought about 3 people who had died on a bridge in a country he wasn't supposed to have been in. He thought about the drawing on the refrigerator. He thought about Lily's voice saying, "That's just what you do." I went to bed at 1 in the morning. At 1:45 his phone buzzed again. This time it was Ray. "One sentence. We have a problem." Daniel sat up in the dark and called him back. Cross made a call 20 minutes ago, Ray said. Encrypted, but we got enough of the fragment. He's spooked. Something shifted, I don't know what, but he called Vale, and the word he used was contaminated. Contaminated, Daniel repeated. He thinks someone inside has been compromised. Not you. He doesn't know about you. But someone. He's pushing to move the timeline again. Not Friday night. Daniel went very still. When? Tomorrow, Ray said. Tomorrow morning. 7 a.m. They want to access the server room before the building is fully operational. They're going to use Marsh's credentials to extract the final architecture files and transmit everything before the dinner even happens. 7 a.m. He checked the time. 1:47, 5 hours and 13 minutes. Is your team in position? He said. They're 40 minutes out. Get them moving, Daniel said. He was already up, already moving toward the closet. And Ray, do not let them into that server room without me. Daniel, I need Marsh, he said. I need her in that building in position before your team moves, because if she rabbits and we lose her, we lose half the evidence chain. He pulled on a shirt. I'm 20 minutes from the tower. Keep them off the server room for 20 minutes. I can't promise. 20 minutes, Ray. He was already moving toward the door. He stopped. He looked back at the hallway, at Lily's closed bedroom door, at the darkness beyond it, where an 8-year-old who thought her father was safe now was asleep with her moon pajamas and her Beatrix Potter books and her absolute uncomplicated faith that the world made enough sense to be okay. He picked up his phone and sent a text to his neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who had a key and who had watched Lily 3 times before without asking difficult questions. He wrote, "Family emergency. Need you to be here when Lily wakes up. I'll explain later. I'm sorry for the hour." The response came back in 90 seconds because Carmen Alvarez was 71 years old and slept lightly and loved Lily like a granddaughter, already getting my coat. He looked at Lily's door one more time. I'll be back, he said quietly. He walked out. The drive to Meridian Tower took 17 minutes. He parked 3 blocks out because the surveillance team might have assets near the building and he needed to arrive dark. He was on foot for the last stretch, moving through the early morning streets of Seattle at 2 in the morning, which were not as empty as people imagined. Cities never sleep entirely, they just shift into a different register, quieter and stranger and lit differently. How was 50 yards from the tower's service entrance when his phone buzzed. Ray. They're inside. 2 of them. Marsh and someone I don't recognize. Cross and Vale are not on site. He stopped walking. He typed back, "Who is the unknown?" 3 seconds. Ray checking. "Give me 60 seconds. He waited. 40 seconds later, the unknown is a man named Gregor Halst. He's revision. Not support staff, he's operational. He's the one who was running the surveillance on your car. Daniel looked at the building's service entrance 20 yards away. Gregor Halst. He didn't know the name, but he knew the designation operational in revision terminology meant enforcer. The person you sent when an asset needed managing. The person you sent when the plan required something beyond data extraction. They weren't just here to take the files. They were here to make sure Marsh didn't leave this building as a liability. He moved. The service entrance had a card reader and a security camera. The camera had a 90-degree coverage angle, which left an 8-inch dead zone on the left side of the doorframe. He reached the dead zone, paused with his back to the wall, and pulled out the override card Ray had couriered with the tracker relay 2 days ago. 1 swipe. The lock clicked open. He was in. The server room was on the 14th floor. He took the stairs because the elevator would register in the building's system. 14 floors at 2 in the morning, moving fast and quiet, which he could do because he'd done it in buildings with active armed patrols in conditions considerably worse than a Seattle high-rise on a cold Thursday night. He reached the 14th floor at 2:23. The server room door was 30 feet down the corridor. It was open. He could hear 2 voices, one clipped and nervous. That was Marsh. He had studied her voice from 3 weeks of security footage that Ray had pulled, and one he didn't know. Low. Deliberate. The voice of someone who is comfortable being the authority in a room. He moved to the open door and stopped outside it, back to the wall. Just the final partition, Marsh was saying. 40 seconds and the transfer is complete. And then we're done here. Halst's voice. Not a question. And then we're done. A pause from Marsh. What happens to the transfer trace if they're IT? It won't matter, Halst said. By the time they're looking for traces, the access keys will have changed hands and the trail will be in 3 jurisdictions. A pause that felt different from the others. Thicker. You've done well, Rebecca. Thank you, Marsh said. She sounded relieved. She should not have sounded relieved. Daniel heard it immediately, the particular cadence of someone being told they're safe right before they stop being safe. He moved into the doorway. The room had 3 rows of server racks down the center and workstations along the left wall. Marsh was at the nearest workstation, her back to him, fingers on the keyboard. Halst was 6 feet to her right, and he was not looking at the screen. He was looking at his phone. He was typing a message. Daniel understood in a fraction of a second what the message was. The same fraction of a second in which Halst's eyes came up from the phone and found him standing in the doorway, and the 2 men looked at each other across 30 feet of server room at 2:23 in the morning. And something passed between them that didn't need words. The mutual recognition of 2 people who had spent their lives in the same kind of dark on opposite sides of it. Marsh heard nothing. Her fingers were still on the keyboard. Rebecca, Daniel said. She spun around. Step away from the workstation, he said. His voice was completely calm. Now, please. She looked at him, at Halst, back at him. Her face cycled through 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, understanding, and then the particular kind of fear that comes not from the present threat, but from the sudden comprehension of how long the trap has been set. Who? She started. Step away, he said again. Calm. Final. She stepped away. Halst moved. He was fast, genuinely fast, the kind that came from real training, not fitness, and he covered the 6 feet between himself and Daniel's position in under a second. Daniel sidestepped, redirected the forward momentum with a grip on the right forearm, and used Halst's own speed to take him into the nearest server rack. The impact was significant. Halst was trained enough to absorb it without going down. He came back up. His right hand went to his jacket. Don't, Daniel said. He stopped. His hand stopped. He looked at Daniel with that particular professional assessment reading. Threat level. Reading? Capability reading. Whether this was a situation that had a favorable resolution, and he found his answer in whatever he saw, because his hand came away from his jacket empty. You were in the file, Halst said. His English was precise and accented Eastern European underneath it. Ghost protocol. You retired. I did, Daniel said. Then what are you doing here? I'm the driver, Daniel said. Halst stared at him for a moment. Then something crossed his face that was not quite a smile and not quite anything else. The driver, he said. Yes. They said you were dead. They were wrong, Daniel said. Put your hands where I can see them and don't move. Halst put his hands up. Slowly. Carefully. And from the corridor behind Daniel came the sound of feet raised, team finally in position, flooding the floor with the quiet efficiency of people who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Rebecca Marsh sat down on the floor next to the workstation and covered her face with her hands and made a sound that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite relief and was mostly just the sound of someone whose entire constructed world has just come apart at the seams and landed around her in pieces. The transfer on the screen was at 63%. Daniel walked to the workstation and hit cancel. Then he stood in the server room at 2:29 in the morning while Ray's team secured Halst and started the evidence documentation, and he breathed in the quiet dark of a room full of machines that hummed indifferently, and he thought about 5 hours from now when he would have to tell Victoria Hayes that the operation was half over and the harder half was still coming. Because Cross and Vale didn't know Marsh and Halst were gone yet, and that meant Friday night's dinner was still happening. It just meant the battlefield had changed. He pulled out his phone. Victoria picked up on the first ring. I know, she said before he could speak. I've been awake. Tell me what happened. Marsh and Halst are in custody, he said. The transfer was stopped at 63%. The core encryption keys are still intact. He heard her exhale, one long, controlled breath. "Cross and Vale," she said. "They don't know yet, which means we have a window, a short one." He paused. "The dinner is still our best play, but now we're playing offense, not defense." A silence. "I'll be ready," she said. "I know you will." He hung up. He looked around the server room, at Ray's team working methodically through the evidence sweep. At Halst, seated against the far wall with his hands secured, looking at Daniel with an expression of professional neutrality that said, "I understand I've lost this particular engagement, and I intend to say nothing further." Daniel looked back at him for a moment. "You should have checked the car more carefully," he said. "Professional advice." Halst said nothing. Daniel walked out of the server room and took the stairs back down to the lobby level and pushed through the service door into the cold Seattle morning and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with his hands in his jacket pockets. 3 hours until Lily woke up. 1 day until it was over. He started walking back to his car, and his footsteps were quiet on the wet pavement, and the city hummed around him in the dark, the way cities do when they don't know what's happening in them, which is almost always. He was not the driver anymore. He had never really been just the driver. And tomorrow night, in a room full of people who had spent 7 years building toward a moment that was not going to arrive the way they planned, everyone was going to find that out. He got home at 4:17 in the morning. Mrs. Alvarez was asleep on the couch with a blanket pulled to her chin and the television on low, some old black and white movie playing without sound. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "Lily slept through everything. Eat something. You look thin on Tuesdays." The note was dated Thursday, which meant she'd written it in advance, which meant she knew him well enough to know he wouldn't eat. He ate half a piece of toast, standing over the sink. Then he went and stood in the doorway of Lily's room for 60 seconds, watching her sleep the way he had done every night since Claire died, not out of anxiety exactly, more out of the need to confirm in a way that was physical and immediate and not mediated by anything that she was still there, that the most important thing was still intact. She was. He went to bed. I was awake again at 7:15, which gave him 3 hours of sleep that felt like 30 minutes, which was fine. He'd operated on less. He got up, made coffee, and when Lily came into the kitchen at 7:40 in her moon pajamas, with her hair doing 4 different things at once, he had her breakfast ready and a completely normal expression on his face. She looked at him. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's ability to read a room before she'd fully entered it. "You were gone last night," she said. "Mrs. Alvarez was here." "I know. I saw her coat by the door when I got up to get water." She sat down at the table and picked up her fork. "I'm good, Bug." She looked at him for another moment. Then she decided, the way she sometimes did, to accept the surface version and file the question for later. "Okay," she said. "Can we talk about the pineapple situation again this weekend?" "No. It's a legitimate topping." "It is not." She sighed with her whole body and started eating, and Daniel sat across from her with his coffee and watched her read the back of the cereal box while she ate, because she always read whatever was in front of her, even cereal boxes, and thought that if he could hold on to this exact image for the rest of the day, it might be enough to keep him level. He drove her to school at 8:15. When she got out of the car, she turned back and looked at him through the open window. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "Come home tonight." He looked at his daughter standing on the sidewalk outside Roosevelt Elementary in her jacket that she was wearing properly for once, backpack over both shoulders, her mother's eyes serious and steady. "I will," he said. She nodded. Like that settled it. Then she turned and walked through the school doors without looking back, because she was 8 years old and she trusted him completely, and that trust was both the most sustaining thing in his life and the heaviest thing he carried. He pulled away from the curb. He had 11 hours until the dinner. Victoria called him at 9 on the dot. Her voice had the quality of someone who had also slept very little and was running on will and black coffee, and the specific cold clarity that comes when you've moved past fear into something more useful. Cross sent the entire executive team a good morning message at 8:45, she said. His usual tone, nothing different. "He doesn't know yet," Daniel said. Either Halst hasn't been able to reach him, or they have a protocol about communication blackouts before an operation. Either way, as far as Cross and Vale are concerned tonight, is still on schedule. How long do we have before they figure out Marsh and Halst are gone? Marsh was supposed to confirm the completed transfer to Cross at 9 a.m., he said. That confirmation isn't coming. Depending on their protocol, Cross will either wait or start making calls. My guess is he waits an hour, then reaches out to Vale. They'll spend another hour trying to reach Halst through back channels. So by 11. By 11, they know something is wrong. By noon, they've either decided to abort or decided to improvise. A pause. Which do you think they'll choose? I thought about it. About the 7 years of investment. About the architecture of the operation. The patience and precision of people who had built this carefully over years and were now 72 hours from the finish line. They'll improvise, he said. They're too close. They've put too much into this to walk away with nothing. And they don't know how much we know. They'll assume the problem is containable. So tonight is still happening. Tonight is still happening, he confirmed. But differently than they planned. They're going to be working without Marsh's system access, which means they can't force the technical transfer remotely. They'll need you to authorize it manually, which means they need me to cooperate willingly or under duress. Yes. She was quiet for 3 seconds. They're going to try to threaten me. They're going to try to threaten you with something personal, he said. Something Marsh's data collection would have given them access to. Something that would make you feel like you had no choice except compliance. What do they have? He paused. This was the part he hadn't wanted to get to yet. Before Halst was taken into custody, I had 40 seconds with his phone. Not enough time to get into it, but enough to see the last message he'd sent before I walked into the server room. What did it say? 2 words, Daniel said. Use Brennan. Silence. Who is Brennan? He asked. The silence went on long enough that he knew the name meant something significant. When she spoke, her voice had changed, still controlled, but with something underneath it that hadn't been there before. Something that was not quite fear, but was adjacent to it. Thomas Brennan, she said. He's my nephew, my sister Karen's son. He's 19, he's a sophomore at UW, and 6 months ago, he did something very stupid involving a friend's car and a quantity of controlled substances that would have ended his college career and possibly his freedom if I hadn't. She stopped. I have a lawyer who is very good at making problems disappear quietly. And the record? Sealed, theoretically. Theoretically, he repeated. If they have access to it, Marsh had level 3 clearance to every personnel and personal data system in your company, he said, including your personal legal correspondence if it was ever sent through company channels. I used my company email once, she said. Once. 2 lines to my assistant asking her to coordinate with the lawyer. A pause. That's all they need, isn't it? That's all they need, he said. They'll threaten to expose the sealed record, destroy Thomas's future, use your protection of your nephew as leverage. Her breathing was steady. He could tell she was managing something, not suppressing it, but holding it at a workable distance while she thought. The record is sealed, she said. Legally. Records get unsealed, he said. Especially when someone with the right resources wants them unsealed. It would take time and legal exposure, but the threat itself doesn't need to be fully executable. It just needs to be credible enough in the moment. And if I don't sign, Thomas takes the fall. Publicly. They'll have made the calculation that the public destruction of your family member is an acceptable cost if it demonstrates to future targets that resistance has consequences. The word consequences landed in the car with a weight that changed the air. They've done this before. Before, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, he said. The revision, the organization behind Cross and Vale. This is their methodology. They don't use physical force as a first instrument. They use what you love, what you've protected, what you'd sacrifice your position to keep safe. A long silence. Thomas doesn't know any of this is happening, she said. No. Is he in danger? Not physical danger, Daniel said. They want leverage, not a crime. His exposure is reputational and legal, not physical. As long as we move correctly tonight, it stays that way. She absorbed that. He could hear her putting the pieces in order the way she always did. Not panicking, not collapsing, but building a response architecture, the way she built everything else, piece by deliberate piece. "What do I do at 9:15 when they come at me with this?" she asked. "You act like it works," he said. "You let them believe the leverage is effective. You buy me the time I need." "And how much time is that?" 4 minutes, he said. Another silence. 4 minutes, she repeated. "Maybe 3, he said. "I'm working on 3. She made a sound that was almost not quite a laugh. "You know this is insane. I've been in worse." "Stop saying that," she said, but there was something different in her voice when she said it this time. Not irritation. Something warmer and more complicated than that. "All right, tonight." "Tonight," he confirmed. "Dress for the dinner. Act like everything is normal. Smile at Ethan Cross and mean every millimeter of it." "And you?" "I'll be there," he said. He spent the rest of the morning with Ray working through the revised operational layout in the back of an unremarkable sedan parked 4 blocks from Meridian Tower. Ray was 53, built like a man who had spent 30 years carrying heavy things, with a face that defaulted to an expression of mild professional concern, regardless of what was actually happening. He was the best operational planner Daniel had ever worked with, and he spread the floor plan of the 42nd floor across the back seat between them and walked through the team positioning with the kind of methodical precision that made dangerous things feel solvable. 6 of Ray's people would be in the building before 6 p.m. 3 as catering staff, 1 as building security, 2 as guests with legitimate cover identities connected to the acquiring company. 2 more would be in vehicles outside managing communication and ready to move. Cross and Vale would arrive for the dinner at 7. The signing was scheduled for 9:15. "The window we give them is 45 seconds, Ray said. "They make their move on her, we let them get far enough to establish intent on record. The moment the coercion is explicit, we move." "The moment it's explicit, she's already been threatened," Daniel said. "I want coverage on her position before 9. "You'll have it. And Cross's phone needs to be live recording from the moment he walks in the door. Whatever he says to Vale, whatever he says to his outside contact, I want all of it." Already coordinated with the tech team, Daniel looked at the floor plan. The event space occupied the entire 42nd floor, an open layout that worked against close surveillance because there were limited positions for coverage without visibility exposure. Cross and Vale were not amateurs. They would read the room when they walked in the way trained people always read rooms. "They'll make us," Daniel said. "Not the catering team, but if I'm visible." "You won't be visible at 9, Ray said. "You'll be adjacent." Daniel looked at him. "The 41st floor has a maintenance access point that connects to a utility corridor running to the 42nd, Ray said. 6-inch clearance. You'll hear everything, and you'll be 60 seconds from the main floor." 60 seconds, Daniel thought. A lot could happen in 60 seconds. "I need 45, he said. Ray looked at him. "You going to tell me you can get from the 41st utility corridor to the main event floor in 45 seconds? "I can get there in 30 if the door cooperates," Daniel said. "Make sure the door cooperates." Ray stared at him for a moment. Then he wrote something on the floor plan. "The door will cooperate," he said. They worked for another hour. By noon, the plan was as solid as it was going to get, which meant it had 7 points of potential failure and 3 variables they couldn't control, which in Daniel's experience was actually better than average. At 12:30, Cross sent an email to the executive team flagging that Rebecca Marsh had taken an unexpected personal leave and would not be attending the dinner. The tone was smooth and explanatory. Nothing alarmed. Daniel read the email on his phone and felt the shift it represented. Cross knew. He'd known since at least 11:30, which meant he and Vale had spent the morning recalibrating. The fact that he'd sent the email at all, the fact that he'd addressed Marsh's absence with a cover explanation rather than simply not mentioning it, meant he was still committed to tonight. He was managing the optics. He was keeping the surface clean. He was improvising, but cleanly. Daniel showed the email to Ray. Ray read it twice and said, "He's good." "Yes," Daniel said. He is. Does that change the plan? It means we run tighter margins, Daniel said. He's going to be watching for anything off, any gap in the performance. He's rattled underneath, but he won't show it, and he'll be reading every face in that room. Then he'll read yours. He won't see mine until 9:15, Daniel said. And by then, it won't matter what he reads. He drove to the tower at 2 o'clock to pick up Victoria, who had spent the morning in a series of meetings that she had conducted, according to her assistant's brief text to Daniel, with complete composure and zero indication that anything in her world was different from any other Friday. She got in the car. She was wearing the dress she'd chosen for the dinner. Dark navy clean lines, exactly the kind of thing that said power without announcing it. She looked like she always looked. Controlled. Prepared. Armor in place. But when she got in and this door closed, and it was just the two of them, she looked at his reflection in the mirror and said, "I called Thomas this morning." He waited. "I didn't tell him anything," she said. "I just called. Talked to him for 10 minutes about his classes, a girl he's seeing, some philosophy paper he's writing." She paused. He sounded happy. Daniel drove. "I made a decision 8 months ago to fix what happened with him," she said. "I used my resources to protect him because he's family, and he made one stupid mistake at 19 years old, and I refuse to let that define the rest of his life." She paused. "And now they're going to use that to come at me." "Yes," Daniel said. "They're going to tell me that everything I did to protect him can be undone. That I handed them a weapon when I protected him. That's what they're going to say. And the answer to that," she said slowly, "is that they're wrong. What I did for Thomas was right, and I'm not going to unmake it by letting them use it." A pause. "That's what I kept coming back to this morning. In all those meetings, sitting across from Ethan Cross, watching him be perfectly professional and perfectly false. I kept thinking that I am not going to let them make me regret protecting someone I love. That is not the outcome." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "That's not the outcome." She looked out the side window. 4 minutes, she said. 3, he said. "I'm down to 3. What happens in those 3 minutes?" "You hold the line," he said. "Whatever they say, whatever they show you, you hold it. Don't agree. Don't sign anything. Don't give them a syllable they can record as consent." He paused. "Can you do that?" "Yes," she said. "No hesitation, no performance. Just the flat, clean certainty of a person who has decided." "Good," he said. They didn't speak again until he pulled to the curb in front of the tower at 2:30 to drop her for her afternoon preparation meetings. She got out, then turned back. "Daniel," she said. "Yes." "After tonight." She paused. "Whatever happens after tonight, I want you to know that I understand what you're doing, what it costs." She held his gaze for a moment. "I know it costs something. I'm not unaware of that." He looked at her. The woman who had looked at him 3 weeks ago and seen a driver. Who had over 19 days come to see something else entirely. Not with comfort or easy reassignment, but with the slow, uncomfortable honesty of someone revising a position they'd been certain of. "Go do your meetings," he said. She almost smiled. "Yes, sir," she said, and turned and walked up the steps. He sat in the car long enough to watch her go through the doors. Then he drove to the 41st floor service entrance of Meridian Tower, showed the maintenance credential Ray had arranged, and spent 45 minutes in a utility corridor, learning a 60-foot path in the dark that he would need to cover in 30 seconds when the moment came. He walked it 4 times. Then he walked it with his eyes closed. Then he stood at the end of it at the door that Ray had promised would cooperate and breathed in the dark. He was ready. He checked his earpiece. Ray's voice came through immediately. "Team is in position. Cross arrived at 6:02. Vale at 6:18. Both upstairs. They're clean, no visible weapons on entry scan, but Cross is carrying something in his left jacket pocket that read as a hard object on thermal. Unclear what." Daniel filed that and said nothing. At 6:45 he took the stairs to 41 and entered the utility corridor. 60 feet of dark. The hum of the building's mechanical systems around him. The faint, filtered sound of the event above music voices. The specific acoustic texture of 60 people beginning an evening that none of them understood the true shape of. He settled in. He waited. That was always the hardest part. Not the action. The action was something his body knew how to do, so well it bypassed thought. The waiting was where the mind went to the places it tried to avoid. He thought about Claire briefly, and with the particular quality of grief that was not sharp anymore, but had weight, still permanent familiar weight, like the ache in his left side that pulled in cold weather. He thought about Lily telling him to come home. He thought about a bridge in a country he wasn't supposed to have been in, and 3 people who hadn't come home, and the weight of carrying that, and whether the weight ever got lighter, or if you just got stronger. I thought it was probably the second one. Ray's voice in the earpiece at 8:54. Victoria is in position. Cross approached her at 8:49. Conversation lasted 3 minutes. She handled it clean, no tells. He's circling back with Vale now. They're going to move at 9. Earlier than 9:15, Daniel thought. They're running their own adjusted timeline. Good. It meant they were feeling the pressure of the changed circumstances. Pressure made people efficient, and it also made them sloppy. And the sloppiness was what he was counting on. At 9:03, the earpiece Cross and Vale are moving to the East Terrace. Victoria is being directed to follow. Our people on the floor are repositioning, but they can't follow to the terrace without blowing cover. Daniel, East Terrace is outside primary coverage. He was already moving, 30 feet. The door at the end of the corridor opened on a maintenance access point adjacent to the 42nd floor kitchen. He came through it and into the kitchen without stopping past 2 of Ray's people in catering uniforms, who clocked him and didn't react, and through the service door into the main event space. The crowd was still there. 50-odd people with champagne and conversation. The business of the evening continuing around the absence of the 3 people who had stepped onto the East Terrace. No one was looking at him. He was a man in dark clothes moving with purpose, and in a room full of people who were looking at each other. A man moving with purpose is almost completely invisible. He crossed the floor in 12 seconds. The terrace door was glass. He could see through it. Victoria was standing with her back to the building's exterior glass panel 12 floors above the street. Cross was 4 feet in front of her, and Vale was to her left, close enough that the geometry of the 3 of them made a shape that was not conversation, it was containment. Cross was holding his phone out, showing her something. Her face was doing what he'd asked it to do, holding the line, keeping everything still. But he could see from this angle the set of her jaw, the specific tension of someone absorbing something that hurts and refusing to let it show. He heard Cross's voice through the glass. Not words, just tone. Even. Explanatory. The tone of someone presenting a very reasonable argument for why you have no choice. Daniel put his hand on the door. 3 seconds. He counted them. Then he opened the door and stepped onto the terrace. All 3 of them turned. Cross saw him first. And the thing that happened on Cross's face in the 2 seconds before he composed himself was something Daniel had seen before. Not often, but enough. It was the expression of a man who has just recognized something he thought was safely in the past. You, Cross said. Me, Daniel said. Vale looked between them. Something shifted in his expression, not recognition, but reevaluation. The rapid professional recalculation of a man who had just found an unknown variable in what was supposed to be a controlled environment. Who is this? Vale said. His voice was careful, measured. The voice of a man who had at various times in his life navigated situations by managing the information he revealed. Ethan. His name is Cole, Cross said. He had gotten his face back. It was smooth again, composed, but there was something behind the composure now that hadn't been there before. Something that knew. Daniel Cole. He looked at Daniel steadily. Ghost protocol. Retired. Reportedly deceased. Reportedly, Daniel agreed. Victoria looked at him. He looked back at her for just a fraction of a second, a look that said, I'm here. Hold the line 2 more minutes. She looked back at Cross. Whatever you think you're doing, Cross said to Daniel, I want you to consider very carefully what's actually happening here. This is a private business conversation. You are a driver. You have no standing. Thomas Brennan, Daniel said. Cross stopped. Sealed juvenile adjacent record. Personal legal correspondence accessed through company data systems by Rebecca Marsh, under your direction. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded document, the printed summary. Ray had provided 6 pages of evidence chain that Cross did not know existed. He held it up. We've had Marsh in federal custody since 2:30 this morning. Halst 2. The server room transfer was stopped at 63%. He watched Cross absorb that. Watched the composure hold for exactly 3 seconds before something beneath it shifted like bedrock moving. The encryption keys are intact. The DoD contract data was never transmitted, and everything you said to Vale tonight has been recorded from the moment you walked through the building's front door. Silence. Total, specific, final silence of the kind that falls when a plan that has taken 7 years ends in 45 seconds. Vale moved first. He was calmer than Cross, the kind of calm that has nothing to do with not being afraid, and everything to do with having prepared for this contingency. He took a step toward the terrace door. "Mr. Vale," Ray's voice said through Daniel's earpiece, and simultaneously through a speaker that Ray had positioned in the event space, loud enough to carry through the glass. "Please stay where you are. Federal agents are entering the building now." Vale stopped. Cross looked at Daniel. His face was completely still. He was a man who had spent 7 years building something complex and patient and precise, and it was gone, and he was looking at the person who had taken it apart, and he was not showing what that felt like, which was, Daniel thought, probably the last professional habit still operating. "You're not active," Cross said. "No," Daniel agreed. "Then this is illegal. Everything you've done." "I'm a driver," Daniel said. "I drove my client to a dinner. What happened afterward is something her attorney will be happy to discuss." He paused. "But you should probably call yours first." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Victoria Hayes, who had been standing with her back to the exterior glass panel of a building 42 floors above the street, holding a line that cost her something real to hold, stepped forward. She looked at Ethan Cross. She took her time with it. Not with anger, or not only anger. With the specific weighted regard of someone who is allowing themselves to fully see something they have been half seeing for a very long time, and finding it exactly as bad as they suspected. 7 years, she said. Cross said nothing. "You sat at my father's funeral, and you cried," she said. "And the whole time you were part of this." Victoria. "Don't," she said. "Just that. Flat and final, the kind of word that closes a door." She looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then she turned away from him entirely, which was more devastating than anything else she could have done, because it said you are not worth the continued attention. She looked at Daniel. He looked back at her. Behind them, through the glass door. The sounds of the evening changed, the murmur of 60 people becoming the specific altered murmur of 60 people realizing something has shifted, that the evening they thought they were attending has become something else. And then the sound of footsteps. Ray's team moving through the main floor. Federal agents coming in through the building's front entrance. Everything converging on the east terrace of the 42nd floor of Meridian Tower on a Friday night in Seattle. "You said 3 minutes," Victoria said to Daniel quietly enough that only he could hear it. "I said I was working on 3, he said. It was under 2. "I was conservative," he said. She looked at him with something in her expression that was not quite relief, and not quite gratitude, and not quite any single thing he had a word for. Something that was the sum of 19 days of every conversation in the back of a car of the moment. She had decided to trust someone she barely knew, because something in her told her she should. "Your daughter," she said. "You need to go pick her up from school." "School ended at 3:15, he said. "Mrs. Alvarez has her. Go home, Daniel." He looked at her. "You're sure?" "Ray's people are here," she said. "The lawyers are going to be here in about 15 minutes. I have approximately 6 hours of federal briefings ahead of me." A pause. "None of that requires a driver," he nodded. He turned toward the terrace door where 2 federal agents were moving cross to one side, and Vale was already in conversation with a third. His voice calm and precisely modulated the voice of a man beginning the long process of deciding what cooperation might be worth. Daniel walked through the event space past 50-odd people who were watching federal agents with the specific frozen attention of guests at a party that has become something else entirely. And he walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby and stood in the car as the floors descended. He was in the Escalade at 9:22. He called Mrs. Alvarez and told her he was on his way and asked if Lily was awake. Mrs. Alvarez said Lily had stayed up watching a nature documentary about octopuses and had fallen asleep on the couch 20 minutes ago and was, quote, snoring like a tiny champion. He drove home through the Friday night city, past the restaurants and the lit windows and the ordinary ongoing life of a place that had no idea what had just happened 42 floors above one of its streets. He parked in front of the house and sat in the car for a moment. He was still in the dark clothes. He had a bruise forming on his left forearm from the server room the night before. His knee ached from the utility corridor and the 30-foot sprint across the event floor and the 27 stairs he'd taken two at a time. He felt underneath all of that something that was not quite peace, but was in the neighborhood of it. The specific settling of a thing that has been held in tension for too long and has finally been released. He got out of the car. Mrs. Alvarez let him in and gave him a look that cataloged the dark clothes and the bruise and the particular quality of his face at 9:30 on a Friday after whatever the night had involved. And she said nothing about any of it, which was why she was the person he called when he needed someone he could trust. "She's on the couch," she said. "Don't wake her." "I won't," he said. "Thank you, Carmen." She patted his arm once gently on the side without the bruise, which he thought meant she'd noticed the bruise, and left. He went into the living room. Lily was on the couch with a blanket that had fallen half off her mouth, slightly open. One sock on, and one sock somewhere that was not on her foot. The nature documentary was still playing silently on the television, an octopus moving through a reef with that particular alien grace that had apparently been enough to put an 8-year-old to sleep mid-episode. He pulled the blanket up. He sat on the edge of the coffee table and looked at his daughter in the blue light of the television. "Come home tonight," she'd said. He had. He sat there for a long time in the quiet of the house in the city that didn't know and let the night move through him and out the other side. Then he turned off the television. He carried Lily to her bed, which he could still do barely. She was getting too big for it, but he didn't want to think about the day he couldn't, and tucked the blanket around her and put the fallen sock on the nightstand because she'd look for it in the morning. He stood in the doorway. "I came home," he said quietly. Not to her exactly, not to the room, to the understanding he'd made with himself 11 years ago and revised 3 years ago and was now perhaps in the process of revising again. He turned off the light. I went to the kitchen and made tea and sat at the table and thought about a woman 42 floors up in a glass tower who was sitting across from federal agents and lawyers and the wreckage of 7 years of patient professional betrayal, holding herself together with the same controlled precision she brought to every room she ever entered. She was going to be all right. He knew that with the same certainty he knew most things not because it was guaranteed, but because he'd seen what she was made of over 19 days in the back of a car. His phone buzzed at 10:47. Victoria. He picked up. They're charging Cross with conspiracy wire fraud violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and 3 counts that the federal attorney described as classified and said, "I'd understand the implications later." Her voice was even and clear, and carried the exhaustion of someone who had been precisely composed for too many hours in a row, and was finally in private allowing the edges to soften. Vale is cooperating. He's been talking for 2 hours, and they say he has enough to give them the European end of the network. Good, Daniel said. The DoD was briefed an hour ago. They're sending their own team Monday morning to audit the encryption architecture. But the word from the federal attorney is that the keys are clean, the transfer never completed. "I know," he said. "You stopped it at 2 in the morning in a server room, and nobody told me until 6 hours later," she said. There was something in her voice that he didn't have a word for, the particular texture of feeling you get when you understand fully and finally the scope of what someone did on your behalf without making it about themselves. "I didn't want you to be nervous at the dinner," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Thomas," she said. "His record. They had it. Their digital assets have been seized," he said. Everything Marsh extracted. The federal attorney's team is working through it now. Thomas's record is sealed. That's where it's going to stay. She exhaled, just once. Long. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, he agreed. A silence that was not empty. The kind of silence that has been earned. Daniel, she said. Yes. Are you home? He looked at the dark kitchen. Lily's drawings on the refrigerator. The moon phase magnet holding up the stick figure, drawing two figures on a beach. My dad is safe now. I'm home, he said. Good, she said. And the word landed with a weight that was about more than the question. She said good night. He said good night. He set the phone down and sat in the kitchen and drank his tea and listened to the house breathe around him, the particular quiet of a home at night, where someone small is sleeping soundly down the hall and the world outside has resumed its ordinary indifference to what happened inside it. Tomorrow, there would be more to do. There was always more to do. Federal interviews and legal processes, and the long, slow unwinding of 7 years of embedded compromise inside a company that now had to learn to trust itself again. There was the question of what came next for Daniel Cole, which was a question that had a shape now that it hadn't had 3 weeks ago, and he wasn't ready to look at it directly yet, but he could feel it there at the edge of his thinking, waiting. But that was tomorrow. Tonight he finished his tea. He washed the cup. He turned off the kitchen light, and for the first time in 19 days, Daniel Cole went to sleep in his own house without anything unresolved waiting for him in the dark. He slept until 7:43 on Saturday morning, which was the latest he'd slept in 3 years, and he woke up to the sound of Lily in the kitchen, doing something that involved a significant amount of cabinet opening and closing, and at least one item hitting the floor and being collected with the specific furtive silence of a child, hoping the sound went unnoticed. He lay there for 30 seconds, looking at the ceiling, letting the day arrive. It was over. The word settled into him slowly, the way warmth settles into cold hands, not all at once, but gradually until you realize the cold is gone, and you can't identify the exact moment it left. 7 years of patient professional destruction had ended on a glass terrace 42 floors above Seattle, and Daniel Cole had slept 8 hours without a single moment of waking, which was something his body apparently needed badly enough to take without asking permission. He got up. Lily was standing at the counter in her pajamas, spatula in hand, watching the pan with the focused intensity of someone who understood something was about to happen but wasn't sure what. Bug, Daniel said. She spun around. Her expression ran through 3 phases in under a second: surprise, guilt, and then the specific recovery expression of a child who has decided that offense is the better strategy. I was making breakfast, she said. I see that. For you, she said. Because you came home. He looked at her. Flour on her left cheek. A dot of batter on her chin. 8 years old with her mother's eyes and her own particular stubbornness, standing in the wreckage of a culinary experiment that had been motivated by something that made the wreckage completely irrelevant. He walked to the stove and turned the burner down. Move over, he said. I had it. I know you did. Move over. She knitted half a scarf while I watched the octopus documentary. A pause. The octopus one was good. Did you know they have 3 hearts? I did know that. 2 of them stop when they swim. She considered this. That seems like a design problem. Probably works fine for an octopus. She watched him work the spatula under the pancake. Was it the bad guy? She asked. He looked at her sideways. From the other night, she said. When you were doing the serious face. Was that what last night was about? He thought about Cross in federal custody, about Vale talking for 2 hours, about a server room at 2 in the morning and a terrace on the 42nd floor, and a woman who had held a line that cost her something real to hold. Yeah, he said. It was the bad guy. Did you figure it out? He flipped the pancake. Perfect on the other side. Yeah, Bug, we figured it out. She nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose prediction has been confirmed. I told you, she said simply, and went to get the syrup. They ate breakfast together at the kitchen table, Lily talking about the octopus documentary and a conflict with a girl named Priya at school that had something to do with a group project and an unfair distribution of poster-making responsibilities. And Daniel listened and asked the right questions and let the morning be entirely and completely ordinary, because ordinary was something he had learned to treat as the extraordinary thing it actually was. His phone buzzed at 9:15. He looked at it. Ray. He let it go to voicemail. He would call Ray back. There were things still to do, processes still in motion, and the federal machine that had engaged itself last night was going to require his participation in ways that would take weeks to fully resolve. He knew all of that. He could hold all of that and still sit at this table with his daughter and let her finish telling him about Priya and the poster. He called Ray back at 10:30 from the back porch while Lily read inside. Debriefing request, Ray said. Monday morning, Federal Building downtown. They want a full operational account, everything from the tracker to the terrace. I'll be there, Daniel said. There's also a conversation someone wants to have with you. Not about the case. A pause. About coming back. Daniel looked at the neighbor's fence. 3 years ago, he had planted a row of something along that fence. He couldn't remember now what he'd planted. Only that Lily had helped both of them in the dirt on a Saturday morning with a bag of bulbs and a trowel, and whatever it was had come up the following spring, and he'd still not known what it was, but Lily had named it Gregory for reasons she had not adequately explained. Gregory was growing again. 3rd year. Tell them I'll hear the conversation, Daniel said. I'm not making any decisions on the phone. That's all they're asking, Ray said. Monday, Daniel said, after the debrief. He hung up and went back inside. Lily looked up from her book. Everything okay? Yeah, he said. People need me to come in Monday and talk about what happened. She processed this. Like a report. Like a report, he agreed. She went back to her book. Then, without looking up, Are you going to go back to the other job? He looked at the back of her head. The question was asked casually, the way she asked most things that weren't casual at all. A habit she had gotten from Claire, who had always deployed her hardest questions in the lightest tone, as if ease of delivery might soften the weight of the answer. I don't know yet, he said. She turned a page. I'm 9 in 4 months, she said. I know. I don't need to be picked up from school every day. A pause. I mean, I like it, but I could take the bus. He sat down across from her. She still wasn't looking up from the book, which meant she was having this conversation the way she had her hardest ones, sideways, where neither of them had to look directly at what was being said. Lily, he said. She looked up. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Whatever happens, whatever I do on Monday or after Monday, I am not going anywhere. You understand? She looked at him for a long moment. Assessing. 8 years old and sharp enough to know the difference between a reassurance offered because it's true and one offered because the person needs you to feel better. She had always been able to tell the difference. She decided it was true. Okay, she said. She went back to her book. Daniel sat there for a while, watching his daughter read, and felt something he didn't have a precise name for, some compound of gratitude and grief and forward motion, all occupying the same space at the same time, which was the natural state of a life that had been lived at a certain intensity and was now navigating what came after. Monday arrived the way Mondays always arrive, with the particular blankness of a day that has no opinion about what it contains. He dropped Lily at school at 8:15. She had her jacket on properly again, both shoulders, which he noticed but didn't comment on, because commenting on it was the most reliable way to ensure it wouldn't happen again. At the curb, she looked back through the window. Report well, she said. I will. And Dad? Yeah. Don't agree to anything without thinking about it. She said it with the gravity of a small person who has decided they are allowed to give adult advice and intends to use that right judiciously. He looked at her. Where did you learn that? Mom used to say it to you, she said, before you left for the trips. She turned and went into the school without elaborating. And Daniel sat at the curb for a moment, with the particular feeling that arrives when your child hands you a piece of your wife in a moment you weren't prepared for. He drove to the Federal Building. The debrief lasted 4 hours. He sat across from two federal attorneys and a man from a department that was referred to only by a three-letter designation, and walked them through every step from the first surveillance vehicle to the server room to the terrace. He was precise and thorough, and left out exactly one thing, which was the conversation about Claire that he'd had with Victoria in the back of the Escalade, because that was private in a way that had nothing to do with the case and everything to do with his understanding of where the line was between what belonged to an operation and what belonged to a person. Nobody asked about that specific conversation. The federal attorney asked at the end whether Daniel had acted under any active authorization or designation. He said, "I'm a driver. I drove my client to a dinner." The federal attorney looked at him for a long moment. Then she wrote something on her notepad and said, "Thank you, Mr. Cole." And that was the end of the debrief. The conversation Ray had promised happened in a smaller room with a man named Warren Holt, who held a position that was described in the most general possible terms, and who had the kind of face that had been calm so long it had settled permanently into that expression like a landscape that has found its grade. "I'll be direct," Holt said. "Please," Daniel said. "What you did over the last 3 weeks, the identification, the surveillance countermeasures, the server room. The terrace was the most effective single-operator work we've seen against a revision asset in 4 years. You did it without authorization, without resources beyond what a former colleague provided informally, and without compromising either the evidence chain or any civilian." He paused. "You are extraordinarily good at this." "I know," Daniel said. It wasn't arrogance. It was the same plain acknowledgement he would have given if someone told him he was tall. "We want you back," Holt said. "Full active status." "We're offering something different," Holt said. "A designation that doesn't exist in the formal record. Consultative, but with full operational authority when you choose to activate it. You set the terms of engagement. You have veto rights on any assignment. You report to 2 people, myself and 1 other, and no one below that level knows your status." Daniel looked at him. "And my daughter." "Non-negotiable," Holt said immediately. "Your domestic life is entirely your own. No surveillance, no interference, no contact at the school or the home. You engage when you choose to engage. You disengage the same way. And if I disengage in the middle of something, then we adapt," Holt said. "We are not in the business of losing assets of your caliber by making unreasonable demands." He paused. "The world has changed since you left Cole. The revision is one of 6 networks operating at this level right now. The things they're after, the systems they're trying to compromise, the implications are not abstract." Daniel thought about the encryption keys, the DoD contract, the 3 intelligence agencies whose communications ran through Secure Path's architecture. He thought about what would have happened if the transfer had completed on a different night with a different driver. "I'm not active every day," Daniel said. "Understood. I pick up my daughter from school." "Of course. And if something feels wrong about an assignment, if something about it reminds me of the last time I ignored something that felt wrong." "You say no," Holt said. "Full stop, no argument." Daniel looked at the man across the table, assessing the way he assessed everything. Not with distrust exactly, but with the careful attention of someone who had learned that the gap between what is promised and what is delivered is where the casualties live. "I'll think about it," he said. Holt nodded. He had the expression of a man who had expected exactly that answer and was fine with it. "Take whatever time you need," Holt said. "We're not going anywhere." Daniel stood up, buttoned his jacket. Then Holt said, "One more thing." He stopped. Holt opened a folder on the table and turned it to face Daniel. Inside was a document. Single page. Official letterhead. Daniel read the first line and felt something he had not been expecting, a tightening in his chest. That was not pain, but was the physiological expression of something that had been wound very tight for a very long time, beginning slowly to release. It was a formal exoneration. His name cleared. The classification on the bridge operation lifted. The 3 people who had died on that mission acknowledged as casualties of a compromised intelligence asset. The double inside the organization and not the result of faulty operational leadership. 3 years late. "This was finalized last week," Holt said. It was waiting for the revision case to close far enough to support it. Cross and Vale's cooperation confirmed the double's identity. The record has been corrected. Daniel looked at the document for a long moment. He thought about the weight, about carrying it, about whether it got lighter or you just got stronger, and how he'd decided it was the second one. He thought maybe it was both. He picked up the document, folded it once, put it in his jacket pocket. "Thank you," he said. He walked out. He sat in his car outside the federal building for 6 minutes before starting the engine. The exoneration didn't bring anyone back. He knew that. It didn't change the bridge or the night or the cold, or the 3 people who had believed in the mission the same way he had. What it changed was the record, the official version of events that had lived in a file somewhere for 3 years, saying that Daniel Cole had failed, had cost lives, had been responsible for the outcome of a mission that had been undermined before it began. The record now said something different. It said the truth. He started the engine. He drove to Secure Path. Victoria was expecting him. Her assistant, a sharp, efficient woman named Dana, who had, according to the text Victoria had sent that morning, been briefed only that there would be a visitor at 2 p.m. who should be brought directly up, met him in the lobby, and walked him to the elevator without unnecessary conversation, which he appreciated. The 42nd floor looked completely different in daylight under normal conditions than it had on Friday night. 60 people's worth of tables and linens and champagne glasses, replaced by the ordinary architecture of a working office. Open-plan glass-walled conference rooms. The low hum of keyboards and conversation that was the sound of a company continuing to function. Victoria's office was in the corner. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides. Her desk was the kind of desk that was large enough to mean something without being large enough to make a statement about it. She was on the phone when Dana showed him in, and she held up one finger and kept talking for 30 seconds. Something about a board statement and a media inquiry, and then hung up and said, "Close the door, please, Dana." And Dana did, and it was just them. She looked different. Not dramatically. She always looked composed, that was a constant. But there was something underneath the composition that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago, or maybe had been there and not visible, something that was slightly less armored, slightly less on guard against the possibility that the room was a threat. "Monday," she said. "I told you I'd be here," he said. "How was the debrief?" 4 hours, he said. "Thorough." "They came to see me Saturday afternoon," she said. 3 hours. 2 attorneys and a man who didn't identify his department. She paused. "He asked about you, specifically, whether I thought you'd acted with good judgment." "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were the best judgment I'd encountered in years," she said, "and that if his organization was smart, they'd figure out a way to keep you." She looked at him steadily. "Did they?" "They made an offer," he said. "Are you going to take it?" He thought about the room with Holt, about the terms, about Lily at the car window saying, "Don't agree to anything without thinking about it." "I'm thinking about it," he said. She nodded. She'd expected that answer too. There seemed to be a lot of people today who had expected his answers. "There are 2 things I need to say to you," she said. "And they're separate, so I'm going to say them separately and ask you not to respond until I've said both." He sat down across from her. "All right. The first is personal," she said. "What you did, starting with the tracker running the surveillance the server room at 2 in the morning. Friday night you did it because it was right, not because anyone asked you to, not because it was your job, and not, I suspect, because you expected anything from it." She paused. "You came into my life as a driver, and you were never actually a driver, and you never once used that to make yourself feel more important than the situation, or to make me feel diminished for not seeing it sooner. That is an extraordinarily rare quality in a person, and I don't want to let it go without naming it." He said nothing. She'd asked him not to. "The second thing is professional," she said. She opened the desk drawer and placed a document in front of him. "Secure Path needs a director of security operations. Not a head of the external security team. We have competent people there. What we need is someone whose entire function is to look at the inside. The people, the processes, the systems, the things that look trustworthy because they've been there long enough that nobody questions them anymore." She looked at him. Someone who sees what other people miss, who notices surveillance rotations from the front seat of a car, who hears a footstep pattern and understands what it means before anyone else has registered there was a sound. He looked at the document on the desk. "It's not a driver position," she said. "Dry without performing it." He looked up at her. "It's a partnership," she said. "In every functional sense. You report to me directly. You have full access to every system, every person, every process in this company. Your compensation reflects your actual value to this organization, which is—" She stopped. "Which is significant." He picked up the document. Read the first page. Read the second. "You wrote this yourself," he said. It wasn't a question. The structure of it, the precision of the language, the way it defined the role, without over-defining it. This wasn't a legal template. This was a person who understood exactly what she was building and had committed it to paper with the same careful, unhedged clarity she brought to everything else. "Saturday afternoon," she said, "after the federal attorneys left." He set the document back on the desk. "The federal offer," he said. "If I take it, if I take both, there would be moments when the two things created a conflict. When what Holt's people needed and what Secure Path needed were not the same." "I know," she said. "You'd be comfortable with that. I'd be informed of it," she said. "That's the difference between what you're describing and what Cross and Vale were doing. The difference isn't conflict of interest. The difference is transparency." She met his eyes. "I'm not asking for a man with no other obligations. I'm asking for the man who told me the truth from a front seat 3 weeks ago, when it would have been considerably easier to stay quiet." He looked at the document again. "I thought about the drawing on the refrigerator. The 2 stick figures. My dad is safe now." He thought about Lily saying, "I'm 9 in 4 months. I could take the bus." He thought about Claire, who had always waited for the real version. He thought about 3 people on a bridge and a file that now said something different, and the particular weight that had shifted in his chest when he'd read it. He thought about a question he'd been asking himself on and off for 3 years in the quiet of the house at night, while Lily slept, the question of whether a person could be fully present to an ordinary life when the extraordinary thing was still in them, still operational, still looking at every room and reading the exits and noticing the things that everyone else missed. Whether trying to put that away entirely was actually good for Lily, or whether it just meant he was spending half his energy suppressing something that was part of who he was. Claire had never asked him to suppress it. She'd asked him to come home. He'd been confusing those 2 things for 3 years. "I need one condition," he said. "Name it." "I leave at 3:15, he said. "Every day. No matter what's happening, I leave at 3:15. She looked at him. "School pickup." "School pickup." She picked up a pen. She wrote something on the top page of the document. She turned it to face him. She had written 3:15 daily, non-negotiable, signed VH, and then her initials. He looked at the page for a moment. Then he picked up the pen she'd set down, and he signed his name below hers, and the thing that had been in the air between them for 19 days, the thing that was neither romantic nor simply professional, but was something that had its own precise category. The category of 2 people who had been through something real together and come out the other side, changed by it, settled into a shape that felt for the first time stable. He put the pen down. "There's something else," he said. She waited. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced the folded document from the federal building. He set it on the desk between them. She looked at it without touching it. "What is this?" "The exoneration," he said. "The last mission. The 3 people who died. The record has been corrected." She looked at the document for a long moment. Then she looked at him. How was looking back at her steadily, the way he looked at things that needed to be looked at directly, not performing equanimity, just inhabiting it the way people inhabit things they've spent long enough with to stop fighting. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Like something I've been carrying got lighter," he said. "Not gone. Lighter." She nodded slowly. "That's honest." "I try to be." She picked up the folded document and held it for a moment. Then she set it back in front of him. "Keep it," she said. "It belongs in your file, not mine." He took it back. He put it in his pocket next to his heart, the way you carry things that are both a wound and a healing, that are both the past and the beginning of something past the past. He stood up. 3 questions, she said. He stopped. First question. Your daughter's name. He looked at her. Lily. Lily. She said it like she was placing it somewhere she'd remember it. Second question. What is she obsessed with right now? He thought about the nature documentary, the cereal box, Gregory on the fence, Beatrix Potter always Beatrix Potter. Octopuses, he said. This week, 3 hearts. Victoria's expression did something complicated and genuine. Third question, she said. Does she like pineapple on pizza? He stared at her. Because if she does, Victoria said, you should know that I have an opinion about that I am willing to defend at length. He looked at her for a moment. At this woman who had spent 3 weeks being systematically betrayed by the people she trusted most, who had held a line on a glass terrace at 42 floors, while everything she'd built was in danger, who had gone home and written a job description from scratch on a Saturday afternoon, and who was now in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, asking him about pizza toppings, with the complete seriousness of a person for whom this was actually relevant information. He almost smiled. She thinks it's a legitimate topping, he said. I disagree. You're wrong, Victoria said. She's right, for the record. He picked up the signed document from the desk. I'll see you tomorrow, he said. 8 o'clock, she said. Don't be late. I'm never late, he said. She picked up her phone. The afternoon was beginning again, the company continuing its motion around her, the board statement, the media inquiry, the DOD audit. Monday, the long and complicated work of rebuilding trust inside walls that had been compromised for 7 years. All of it waiting, all of it manageable. He walked to the door. Daniel, she said. He turned. She looked at him across the office. The woman who had looked at him 3 weeks ago and seen a driver, and who had been wrong, and who had been honest enough with herself to change her assessment, and humble enough not to make that change about herself. Thank you, she said. Just that. 2 words, plain and real, carrying the full weight of 19 days, and a server room, and a terrace, and every conversation in the back of a car. He nodded once. He walked out. He rode the elevator down to the lobby, and walked through the glass doors of Meridian Tower into the Seattle afternoon, and the city moved around him the way cities move, indifferent and continuous, and he walked to the Escalade and got in. He checked his watch. 2:51. He had 24 minutes. He drove to Roosevelt Elementary and parked at the curb at 3:13, 2 minutes ahead, the way he always arrived. The school doors opened at 3:15 exactly, and children came out in the particular energetic wave of people who have been contained by institutional structure for 6 hours and are now free, and among them backpack over both shoulders and jacket tied around her waist. Because apparently, one lesson was the limit for a given week, was Lily. She saw the car. She saw him. She walked over and got in the back seat and said, "How was the report?" "Good," he said. "Thorough." "Did you agree to anything without thinking about it?" "I thought about everything," he said. She looked at him, reading him the way she always did, the way her mother had taught her without knowing she was teaching her, deciding whether the surface version was the real one. She decided it was. "Okay," she said. She pulled her book out of her backpack and opened it. He pulled away from the curb. They drove through the afternoon in the particular companionable quiet of 2 people who have learned that presence is enough, that you don't always need to fill the air between you to prove you're there. The city moved past the windows. The October light was going gold at the edges the way it does in Seattle in the fall, when the clouds let it through briefly, specifically, like a reminder that it exists. Daniel drove and Lily read, and neither of them spoke for 6 blocks. Then Lily said, without looking up from the book, "She called today." He glanced in the rear view. Who did? The woman, Victoria. She turned a page. She called Mrs. Patterson in the office and asked to leave a message for me personally, which Mrs. Patterson said was unusual, but she wrote it down. He kept his voice even. What did the message say? Lily reached into her backpack and produced a folded piece of paper pink from the school office memo pad. Mrs. Patterson's neat handwriting. She read it aloud. Dear Lily, my name is Victoria. I work with your father. He told me you are very smart and that you are currently an expert on octopuses, which I find extremely impressive. I wanted you to know that your dad is one of the best people I have ever met. He is safe, and he is coming home today. Signed, a person who owes him more than she can say. Lily refolded the paper. She put it in her backpack. She went back to her book. Daniel drove. His jaw was tight for reasons that had nothing to do with tension. She sounds nice, Lily said. She is, he said. She called me an expert, Lily said. That was accurate of her. It was, he agreed. 2 more blocks in silence. Then Lily said, Can we get pizza tonight? Sure. I'm going to say pineapple again. I know you are. And this time I have a new argument. I'm sure you do. It involves the concept of contrast as a culinary principle, she said. I read about it. He looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. 8 years old. Moon pajamas and a school backpack and a book she read on bus rides and in car rides and at breakfast, and probably if he let her at dinner. A person who drew stick figures on the refrigerator and named plants. Gregory, for reasons she kept to herself, and made pancake attempts as acts of love, and asked him with perfect directness whether he was okay. The most important thing he had ever done. The thing that was worth coming home for. Make your argument, he said. She made it. It was objectively a better argument than the previous one, though he would never tell her that. He pushed back on 2 points, she conceded one and held the other, and they were still debating the culinary legitimacy of pineapple as a pizza topping when he pulled into the driveway and put the car in park and turned off the engine. He sat for a moment. The house was in front of them. The lights inside were off because nobody had been home all day, but it would be warm in 3 minutes because the thermostat was programmed for 3:15, same as always. Lily's drawings on the refrigerator. Gregory on the fence. 2 stick figures on a beach and a sentence written in a child's handwriting that he had read every morning for 3 years. My dad is safe now. He looked at his daughter in the mirror. Lily, he said. She looked up from his book. I love you, he said. I need you to know that every single thing I do is because of that. Do you understand? She looked at him. Held the look the way she held things she was taking seriously. Yes, she said. Okay, he said. I love you too, Dad, she said. Can we go in? I want to start the pizza debate fresh at the table. I feel like I have better energy for it indoors. He laughed. It came out genuine and unplanned, the way the best things do, and it filled the car the way warmth fills a cold space all at once from the inside out. He got out of the car. He opened her door. She got out with her backpack and her book and her jacket still tied around her waist, and she walked up the front path, and he followed his daughter into the house. Daniel Cole, who had been a ghost and a driver and a widower and a father. And for 19 days, something he didn't have a clean name for, came home. He turned on the lights. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, and this time he intended to stay.